Can you pretend to be my husband tonight? The desperate whisper cut through the storm-battered night as a mud-soaked woman clutched a stranger's arm, her eyes wild with fear. Behind them, angry voices shouted through the rain. The tall cowboy looked down at her torn dress, her bleeding hands, the terror in her face, and made a choice that would change everything. He didn't know she was running from a monster. She didn't know he was the richest rancher in Wyoming. Some lies become the truest things we ever say. If you want to know how a single desperate question led to the greatest love story the Wyoming Territory ever witnessed, stay with me until the very end. And please, comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The storm came like vengeance itself. Evelyn Hart had never believed in divine retribution until that moment, when the sky split open above the Wyoming plains and rain fell like bullets against her face. Her horse, a chestnut mare borrowed without permission from her father's stable, stumbled through the mud with foam flying from its mouth, its eyes rolling white with panic. Lightning cracked across the black heavens, illuminating the landscape in stark, terrible clarity. Miles of empty grassland, no shelter, no salvation, just endless rolling darkness broken by flashes of brilliance that burned themselves into her vision. Behind her, perhaps a mile back but closing fast, rode Silas Garner's men. She could hear them even over the thunder, their shouts carrying on the wind, the drum of hooves against waterlogged earth, the occasional crack of a rifle fired into the air to frighten her into stopping. They wanted her alive. That was the only mercy she could expect, and it was no mercy at all. Silas wanted his property returned intact. That's what she was to him, property, purchased with her father's gambling debts and sealed with a handshake she'd never agreed to. Please, she gasped to the horse, to God, to anyone who might be listening. Please, just a little further. But the mare had nothing left to give. Evelyn felt it in the animal's stride, the faltering rhythm, the desperate heaving of its lungs, the way its front legs began to buckle with each step. She tried to slow their pace, to ease the horse's burden, but terror drove her forward even as reason screamed at her to stop. The end came with horrible suddenness. One moment they were galloping through the storm, the next the mare's front hoof caught in a prairie dog hole hidden beneath the mud. The horse screamed, a sound Evelyn would hear in nightmares for years to come, and went down hard, pitching forward with momentum that sent Evelyn flying from the saddle like a stone from a sling. She hit the ground with force that drove all the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her shoulder, her hip, her ribs. The world spun in dizzying circles, sky and earth trading places in a nauseating dance of black and darker black. Rain hammered down on her upturned face, filling her gasping mouth, drowning her even as she lay on solid ground. "Get up!" something inside her screamed. "Get up or die. Here." She rolled onto her hands and knees, mud squelching between her fingers, and tried to stand. Her left ankle buckled immediately, sending fresh agony lancing up her leg. Sprained, maybe broken. She couldn't tell, didn't have time to check. Behind her, perhaps half a mile distant now, she could see torchlights bobbing through the darkness. Garner's men, closing in like wolves on wounded prey. The horse was still down, struggling weakly to rise, its front leg clearly broken. Evelyn's heart shattered at the sight, but she had no gun to end its suffering, no time to offer even a moment's comfort. She stumbled away, dragging her injured foot, knowing she wouldn't make it another 100 yards before they caught her. This is how it ends, she thought with strange clarity, dragged back to marry a man I despise or shot in the back for trying to escape. Either way, I lose. But then, through the sheets of rain and the flashes of lightning, she heard something that didn't fit the storm's rhythm, hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, coming from the west rather than the east. A single rider, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Evelyn froze, torn between hope and terror. Friend or enemy? Salvation or another threat? In her experience, strangers on the prairie at midnight were rarely benevolent. The rider emerged from the darkness like something from a fever dream. He sat tall in the saddle atop a black horse that seemed carved from the storm itself. Powerful, steady, utterly unafraid of the lightning that split the sky. The man wore a long coat that billowed behind him like dark wings, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain. She couldn't see his face clearly, just the strong line of his jaw and the glint of his eyes as another flash of lightning illuminated them. Eyes the color of thunderclouds, she would remember later. Gray and fierce and somehow calm all at once. He pulled his horse to a halt 10 feet from where she stood swaying, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other across the rain-swept distance. She saw him take in her appearance. The torn dress that had once been her mother's best Sunday gown, now muddy and soaked beyond repair. The blood on her hands from where she'd fallen, the way she held her weight off her injured ankle, the wild, desperate look in her eyes. "You hurt?" His voice cut through the storm, deep, steady, with the kind of authority that expected honest answers. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but what came out was closer to a sob than words. "They're coming, please. I can't." She didn't finish the sentence because her legs finally gave out, sending her collapsing forward into the mud. She braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, strong hands caught her under the arms, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted again, but this time when the spinning stopped, she found herself cradled against a broad chest, being lifted onto the black horse's back. "Easy," the stranger murmured, though she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. "I've got you." He swung up behind her with fluid grace, one arm circling her waist to hold her steady while his other hand gathered the reins. Then he was pulling off his coat, warm and dry on the inside despite the rain, and wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. "You'll freeze if you stay out here," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Hold on." She wanted to protest, to explain, to warn him about the men pursuing her, but exhaustion and shock were catching up fast. Her head fell back against his shoulder as he turned the horse north, and she felt rather than heard the low rumble of his voice as he urged the animal into a steady canter. Behind them, Garner's men were closing in. She heard their shouts, closer now, recognized the voice of Wade Miller, Silas's foreman, calling out through the storm. "Stop! That woman's a runaway! You're harboring stolen property!" The stranger's arm tightened fractionally around her waist. "Stolen property," he repeated, his voice so low and dangerous that Evelyn felt it reverberate through her bones. Is that what they're calling women these days? He didn't slow down. If anything, he urged the black horse faster, and the animal responded with a burst of speed that would have unseated Evelyn if not for the iron grip holding her in place. The stranger guided them with expert precision through the darkness, somehow seeing paths through the storm that Evelyn's panicked flight had missed entirely. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes before a light appeared in the distance, warm and steady, beckoning like a lighthouse through the tempest. As they drew closer, Evelyn could make out the shape of a building, long and low, with smoke rising from its chimney despite the rain. "Eldridge Relay Station," the stranger said, answering the question she hadn't asked. "It's not much, but it's dry and defensible, and old Tom doesn't ask questions." He pulled the horse to a halt outside the station's covered porch, then dismounted with fluid grace before reaching up to lift Evelyn down. Her legs buckled again when her feet touched solid ground, but he simply scooped her into his arms and carried her toward the door, kicking it open with one muddy boot. The interior was exactly what one would expect from a frontier relay station. Rough wooden walls, a pot-bellied stove radiating blessed heat, a handful of mismatched chairs and tables, and a grizzled old man behind a makeshift counter who looked up from his newspaper with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd seen everything. "Evening, Tom," the stranger said calmly, as if he hadn't just ridden through a biblical storm carrying an injured woman. "Need a room for the night, and some hot water if you've got it." Tom's eyes flicked from the stranger to Evelyn, taking in her bedraggled state with one comprehensive glance. "Rooms available. 2 bits for the night, 4 bits if you want breakfast." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "Had some men through here about an hour ago asking about a runaway woman. Said she was dangerous, might be armed." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The stranger felt her tense in his arms and tightened his grip reassuringly. "Good thing this is my wife, then," he said evenly, meeting Tom's gaze with steady calm. "Fell off her horse a few miles back. Twisted her ankle pretty badly. We'll take that room now." The lie was delivered with such casual confidence that for a moment even Evelyn almost believed it. Tom's weathered face revealed nothing as he produced a key from beneath the counter and gestured toward a narrow hallway. "Third door on the left. I'll bring hot water in 10 minutes. The stranger carried Evelyn down the dim corridor and shouldered open the indicated door, revealing a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window covered by a threadbare curtain. He set her down gently on the bed, then moved to the window, peering out into the storm-dark night. "They'll be here soon," he said quietly. "Garner's men. They're persistent, I'll give them that." Evelyn stared at him, really seeing him for the first time now that they were out of the rain and in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, give or take a few years. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of hard physical labor rather than gymnasium exercise. His face was all strong lines and sharp angles, high cheekbones, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, a jaw that could have been carved from granite. His hair, dark and wet from the rain, curled slightly at his collar. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see right through her, past all her fear and desperation to something deeper underneath. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. He turned from the window, and for the first time she saw the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Couldn't very well leave you out there to drown, could I?" "But you lied for me. Told Tom I was your wife. You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know men like the ones chasing you, and I know that look in your eyes, the look of someone running from something worse than death." He paused, studying her face. "Am I wrong?" Evelyn shook her head mutely, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She'd been running for 3 days, sleeping rough, too terrified to stop at any town where Silas might have connections. She'd had no plan beyond away, no destination, no resources, nothing but the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, she could disappear into the vast expanse of the Wyoming Territory and never be found. A knock at the door made her jump. The stranger moved with lightning quickness, positioning himself between Evelyn and the door, one hand dropping to the gun at his hip with practiced ease. "Hot water," came Tom's gruff voice. The stranger relaxed fractionally and opened the door, accepting a steaming kettle and some clean cloths from the old man. Tom's eyes flicked past him to where Evelyn sat on the bed, and she saw something like understanding pass across his weathered features. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry," Tom said. "And, those men I mentioned? They're planning to stay in town tonight. Wait out the storm. Figured you'd want to know." "Much obliged, Tom." After the old man left, the stranger poured hot water into the basin on the washstand and brought it over to the bed along with the cloths. "Let me see that ankle." Evelyn hesitated, then slowly extended her injured leg. He knelt beside the bed with surprising gentleness for such a large man, carefully unlacing her muddy boot and easing it off. She hissed in pain as he examined the swollen joint, his fingers probing with the confident touch of someone who'd dealt with injuries before. "Sprained, not broken," he pronounced after a moment. "You're lucky. Needs to be wrapped and elevated, and you'll need to stay off it for a few days, but it'll heal clean if you're careful." He dampened one of the cloths and began cleaning the mud and blood from her hands and feet with efficient, impersonal movements. Evelyn watched him work, questions tumbling through her exhausted mind. "What's your name?" she finally asked. He looked up, and again she saw that faint hint of a smile. Rowan Cross." "I'm Evelyn Hart." "Well, Evelyn Hart, seems like you've gotten yourself into a considerable amount of trouble." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "My father, he gambled, lost everything, our land, our savings, everything. When he couldn't pay his debts, Silas Garner offered him a way out." She swallowed hard, the words bitter on her tongue. "Garner's 53 years old. He's already buried 2 wives under mysterious circumstances, and he wanted a third." Rowan's jaw tightened, the only sign of the anger she could feel radiating from him. "So you ran?" 3 nights ago, during dinner, when everyone was distracted. I took my mother's dress and the fastest horse in the stable, and I rode." She laughed, a broken sound without humor. "I didn't even have a plan. I just knew I couldn't marry him. I'd rather die out on the prairie than let that man touch me." "You won't die," Rowan said firmly, "and you won't have to marry him either." "Not if I can help it." Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, another knock sounded at the door, harder this time, more aggressive. Rowan rose smoothly to his feet, positioning himself once again between Evelyn and potential danger. "Who is it?" he called out. "U.S. Marshal Cobb." The voice was clipped and official. "Open up. I have some questions about the woman you brought in." Evelyn's heart dropped into her stomach. A marshal. Silas must have connections even here, must have spread word that she was a criminal, a thief, something that would make the law hunt her. She looked at Rowan with panic in her eyes, but he remained eerily calm, pressing one finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. "Just a moment, Marshal," he called out. Then moving quickly to Evelyn's side, he whispered urgently, "Do you trust me?" It was an insane question. She'd known this man for less than an hour. He was a complete stranger who'd appeared out of a storm and claimed her as his wife without her consent. By all rights, she should be terrified of him. But when she looked into those storm-gray eyes, she saw no threat, no malice, no hidden agenda. Just steady resolve and something else. Something that looked almost like an old recognition, as if he'd been waiting a long time to find her. "Yes," she breathed. "Then follow my lead." He opened the door to reveal a tall, thin man in a marshal's uniform, his badge glinting in the lamplight. Behind him stood Wade Miller and two other men from Garner's ranch, their faces twisted with malicious satisfaction. "Evening, Marshal," Rowan said politely. "How can I help you?" Marshal Cobb's eyes moved past Rowan to where Evelyn sat on the bed, her ankle propped up, looking as vulnerable and innocent as any injured woman. "That the woman who came in with you?" "That's my wife, yes." "Your wife?" The marshal's tone suggested deep skepticism. "Got papers to prove of that?" "Papers?" Rowan's eyebrows rose. "We were married by a traveling preacher 6 months ago up in Montana Territory. Didn't think we needed papers for me to tend to my wife's injured ankle." Wade Miller pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. That woman is Evelyn Hart, and she's betrothed to Mr. Silas Garner. She ran away 3 days ago, stole a valuable horse, and—" "I think you've got the wrong woman," Rowan interrupted smoothly. "This is Evelyn Cross, my wife. We've been traveling from Montana to meet my family down in Cheyenne. Her horse stumbled in the storm, threw her badly. I was bringing her here to rest when you gentlemen apparently decided to chase us through the rain for no good reason." The marshal looked between Rowan and Evelyn, his expression troubled. "Ma'am, is what this man says true? Are you his wife?" Evelyn's throat was so tight she could barely breathe, but she forced herself to meet the marshal's eyes. Everything hung on this moment. One word could send her back to Silas, back to a fate worse than death. She thought of her mother, dead these past 5 years. She thought of the sister she'd lost to fever when they were children. She thought of all the women she'd known who'd had their choices stripped away, their lives dictated by men who saw them as property. "Not me," she thought fiercely. "Not today." "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady. "This is my husband, Rowan Cross. We've been married since April." Wade Miller exploded. "She's lying. Marshal, you can't believe—" "I can believe what I see with my own eyes," Marshal Cobb interrupted sharply. "I see a man and his wife sheltering from a storm. Unless you have proof of your claims, actual legal documents showing this woman is engaged to your employer, I suggest you leave these folks alone." "Mr. Garner has a contract between himself and her father, I'd wager," the marshal said. "Not with the woman herself. And last I checked, forced marriage was illegal even out here on the frontier." He tipped his hat to Rowan. "Sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Cross. You and your wife have a good evening." He turned and herded the protesting ranch hands back down the hallway, leaving Rowan and Evelyn alone in the sudden, ringing silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rowan quietly closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "That was close," he murmured. Evelyn discovered she was shaking, not from cold now, but from the massive release of tension. You just lied to a U.S. Marshal. For me. Why would you do that?" Rowan moved away from the door and crouched beside the bed so their eyes were level. In the lamplight, his face was all shadows and angles, but his expression was impossibly gentle. "Because I've seen what happens to women in your situation," he said quietly. "And because He hesitated as if weighing whether to continue. Because a long time ago, someone saved my life when they didn't have to, and I've been trying to pay that debt forward ever since. What happened to you? That's a story for another time. He rose to his feet, moving to the window again to peer out at the storm. For now, we need to figure out what happens next. Garner's men will report back to him, and even if the marshal believed us tonight, they won't stop. Men like Silas Garner don't accept defeat easily. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down like a physical force. I have nowhere to go. No money, no family, except my father, and he's the one who sold me in the first place. I thought if I could just make it to California, maybe I could disappear, start over, but I didn't even make it 50 miles. California's a long way, Rowan agreed, but there are places closer where a woman can disappear if she needs to. Places where Garner's reach doesn't extend. He turned from the window, his storm-gray eyes thoughtful. I know a cabin, about 20 miles north of here. Abandoned for years, but the structure's still sound. Remote enough that no one would think to look there. You could rest, let that ankle heal, figure out your next move. Why are you helping me? Evelyn asked again, because she still couldn't comprehend it. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You've already risked so much. Maybe I'm just a fool with a weak spot for people in trouble, Rowan said with a slight smile. Or maybe I recognize a fighter when I see one. You rode 3 days through hostile territory with no plan and no resources, just sheer will and determination. That takes courage. Deserves better than what you've been dealt. Evelyn felt tears welling up again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or despair, but something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. I don't even know how to thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this by half. He moved toward the door. I'm going to talk to Tom, see if we can get you some food and maybe some clothes that aren't soaked through. Then tomorrow, when the storm breaks, we'll head north to that cabin. But tonight, you rest. Doctor's orders. You're a doctor? Evelyn asked, surprised. No, but I've patched up enough injured people and horses and cattle and one very stubborn mule that I figure I've got some authority on the subject. His smile widened into something genuinely warm. Get some sleep, Evelyn Hart. Or should I say, Evelyn Cross. We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow. He slipped out of the room before she could respond, leaving her alone with her tumbling thoughts and her racing heart. Evelyn Cross, she thought, testing the name in her mind. Mrs. Rowan Cross. It was strange how easily that lie had come, how natural it had felt to claim a stranger as her husband. Stranger still was the fact that, for just a moment when she'd said it, she'd almost believed it herself. She lay back on the narrow bed, Rowan's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to ease, the thunder growing distant, the rain settling into a steady patter rather than a deluge. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of dishes, the ordinary sounds of life continuing despite the chaos of the night. Exhaustion was pulling her down like an undertow, but before sleep could claim her, the door opened again. Rowan entered carrying a bowl of stew, a hunk of bread, and what looked like a clean shirt and pair of trousers. Tom's wife passed a few years back, he explained, setting the food on the washstand. He kept some of her things, said you could have these if you need them. Might be more practical than a torn dress for riding. Thank you, Evelyn said, meaning it for so much more than just the clothes. Rowan nodded, then moved to the single chair in the room and settled into it with his legs stretched out, his hat tilted down over his eyes. Eat, then sleep. I'll keep watch. You're staying. Someone needs to, in case Garner's men get ambitious. He adjusted his hat fractionally, and she could see the hint of his eyes beneath the brim. Alert, watchful, protective. Besides, we're married, remember? Wouldn't be proper for a husband to abandon his wife. There was dry humor in his voice, but underneath it, Evelyn heard something else. A commitment. A promise made and intended to be kept. She ate the stew, simple but hot and filling, and changed awkwardly into the borrowed clothes, grateful that Rowan kept his eyes scrupulously averted. The trousers were too large but manageable when cinched with a belt, and the shirt hung loose but warm. She settled back into the bed, Her injured ankle elevated on a folded blanket and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, dragging her down into blessed darkness. But even in her dreams, she remained aware of Rowan's presence, a steady, solid certainty in the chair across the room, a guardian through the darkness, a stranger who'd become, at least for tonight, the most important person in her world. Outside, the storm finally broke. The rain ceased, the thunder faded to distant rumbling, and the Wyoming night settled into the kind of profound silence that exists only in the vast, empty spaces of the frontier. In the relay station, two people who'd been strangers hours ago slept, one peacefully for the first time in days, one with one eye open and one hand on his gun, ready to defend a woman he barely knew with his life if necessary. And in the town 5 miles to the south, Silas Garner received word that his runaway bride had been found, but claimed to be married to another man. His rage was cold and calculated, the kind of anger that plans vengeance rather than acting in heat. "Find out who this Rowan Cross is," he ordered his foreman. "Find out everything, where he's from, what he wants, how much he has. Every man has a price or a weakness. Find his, and we'll get my property back." Wade Miller nodded, already mentally compiling the list of contacts who could provide information. "And if he won't deal?" Silas smiled, an expression without warmth or humor. "Then we'll remind him that the Wyoming Territory is a dangerous place. Accidents happen, especially to men who steal what belongs to others." The night deepened. In one place, hope and safety flickered like a tentative flame. In another, darkness gathered itself for another assault. The storm had passed, but the reckoning was just beginning. Dawn broke over the Wyoming plains like a whispered promise, painting the storm-washed sky in shades of rose gold and pale amber. Evelyn woke slowly, consciousness returning in fragments, the unfamiliar weight of borrowed clothes against her skin, the dull throb of her injured ankle, the sound of someone moving quietly across wooden floorboards. Her eyes opened to find Rowan already awake, standing at the window with his back to her, silhouetted against the morning light. He'd removed his hat, and she could see his dark hair curling slightly at his collar, still damp from where he'd obviously splashed water on his face from the basin. His posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of a man accustomed to watching horizons for trouble. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. He turned, and she saw that his eyes were shadowed with fatigue but clear. "Couple hours. Wanted to make sure our friends from last night didn't decide to cause problems." He moved toward this bed, his expression softening as he took in her appearance. "How's the ankle?" Evelyn flexed her foot experimentally and winced. "Sore, but better than last night." "Good. Think you can ride if we take it slow?" "I can ride." She sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "Where exactly is this cabin you mentioned?" Rowan crossed to the washstand and poured fresh water into the basin, giving her privacy to wash. "North along the Powder River, about 20 miles from here. Used to belong to a trapper named Carson who worked these territories back in the 40s. He died childless, left no heirs. Place has been abandoned for near 10 years now, but the roof's solid and there's a good well. Remote enough that most folks have forgotten it exists." "And you think we'll be safe there?" "Safer than here." He glanced back at her, his expression serious. "Garner's men will be watching this station now, waiting to see where we go. We'll need to be smart about the route we take, make sure we're not followed." Evelyn washed quickly, grateful for the clean water and the relative privacy of the moment. When she finished, she found Rowan had laid out some strips of cloth on the bed. "For your ankle," he explained. "Needs to be wrapped tight if you're going to ride." She expected him to leave the room while she tended to it, but instead he knelt beside the bed again with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he'd shown the night before. His hands were surprisingly gentle as they wrapped the cloth around her swollen joint, the touch impersonal but careful. "You've done this before," Evelyn observed. "Had to. Spent years working ranches where the nearest doctor was 3 days' ride. You learn to tend injuries or people die." He tied off the bandage with a final neat knot. "There. That should hold for the ride, but you'll need to rest it properly once we reach the cabin." "Rowan, she said softly, and he looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just because you have a weak spot for people in trouble. There's something else. I can feel it. For a long moment he was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he sat back on his heels and seemed to come to some internal decision. 6 years ago, he said quietly, I was working a cattle drive up in Montana Territory. Late spring, rivers running high with snowmelt. We were crossing the Yellowstone when my horse spooked and threw me into the current. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. I was a strong swimmer, but the river was stronger. Swept me downstream, slammed me against rocks, dragged me under. I was drowning, knew I was dying, could feel the cold pulling me down into darkness. Evelyn found herself leaning forward, caught by the raw honesty in his voice. And then someone grabbed me, Rowan continued, pulled me out of that killing water and dragged me into a shed on the riverbank. I was half dead, hypothermic, barely conscious. But this person, this woman, she stayed with me through the night, built a fire, wrapped me in blankets, wouldn't let me slip away into the cold. I remember her voice, talking to me, telling me stories to keep me awake. Something about growing up on a farm, about a sister who died, about wanting more from life than what she'd been given. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. What did this woman look like? I never saw her face clearly. It was dark, and I was drifting in and out. But I remember her hands, small, work-roughened, with a scar across the left palm like someone had grabbed a knife blade. He looked at Evelyn steadily. By morning, I was stable enough that she felt safe leaving me. When I woke up properly, she was gone. I searched for months, tried to find her, to thank her. But Montana's a big territory, and I had nothing to go on except a voice in the darkness and the memory of hands that refused to let me die. Very slowly, feeling as if she were moving through a dream, Evelyn extended her left hand palm up. There, crossing the base of her thumb, was a thin white line, the scar she'd carried since she was 12 years old when she'd tried to stop her father from beating their horse and grabbed the knife he'd been threatening the animal with. Rowan went absolutely still. Then, with infinite care, he reached out and traced the scar with one finger, his touch feather-light. "It was you," he breathed. "I was traveling with my father," Evelyn whispered, the memories flooding back now that she knew where to look for them. "He was trying to find work, moving from ranch to ranch. We'd stopped to camp by the river that night when I heard someone shouting for help. I ran to the bank and saw you in the water, going under. I didn't think, I just acted, grabbed a rope from our wagon, found a shed nearby, dragged you inside." She swallowed hard. "You were so cold. I thought you were going to die. I talked all night just to keep you conscious, to give you something to focus on besides the cold. You saved my life. And 6 years later, you saved mine." Evelyn felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but this time they came with a sense of wonder, of rightness, as if the universe had been carefully arranging pieces on a board, and only now was the pattern becoming clear. What are the chances? In all the empty spaces of the frontier, all the millions of miles of nothing, what are the chances we'd find each other again? Rowan's hand was still cradling hers, his thumb resting against that old scar. "I stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago," he said softly. "Some things are meant to happen. Some debts are meant to be paid." Before either of them could say more, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They both tensed, Rowan rising smoothly to his feet, with his hand dropping automatically to his gun. "It's Tom," came the old man's voice. "Got some news you'll want to hear." Rowan opened the door cautiously. Tom stood in the hallway, his weathered face grave. "Garner's men left about an hour ago," Tom said without preamble. "But they didn't go far. They're camped on the south road watching the station. Seems they figure you'll have to come out eventually, and when you do, they'll follow you wherever you're headed." "Damn," Rowan muttered. "How many?" "4 that I counted. Could be more I didn't see." Rowan was silent for a moment, thinking. Then, "Is there another way out of here? Something that doesn't go through the main roads?" Tom's eyes gleamed with approval. "There's an old supply trail that runs behind the station, heads northeast into the foothills. Hasn't been used in years. Most folks have forgotten it exists. Rough riding, but it'll get you clear of anyone watching the main routes." "Will it take us toward the Powder River?" "Eventually. You'll have to circle around some, add maybe 5 miles to your journey, but it'll keep you hidden." Tom paused, then added, I can create a distraction if you need one. Send one of the stable boys out on the south road, make it look like someone's leaving, draw their attention while you slip out the back. Rowan glanced at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded once, firmly. Whatever it took to escape Garner's reach, she was willing to try. We're grateful, Tom, Rowan said. More than I can say. The old man waved this off with gruff dismissal. Don't hold with men who treat women like property. My Sarah would have skinned me alive if I'd ever tried such a thing. His expression softened fractionally. You two remind me of us back when we were young. Same look in your eyes, like you found something worth fighting for. After Tom left to make arrangements, Rowan and Evelyn gathered their few belongings in tense silence. There wasn't much. The clothes on their backs, Rowan's coat, a small bundle of food Tom had prepared. Evelyn braided her hair back tightly, tucking it under a hat Tom had provided, trying to look less like a runaway woman and more like a young ranch hand. Ready? Rowan asked, and she nodded. They slipped out through the back of the station just as Tom sent a boy galloping down the south road on a flashy paint horse. Through a gap in the buildings, Evelyn caught a glimpse of Garner's men mounting up to follow, taking the bait exactly as planned. Rowan's black horse was waiting in a small corral behind the kitchen, already saddled. He swung up first, then reached down to pull Evelyn up behind him. She settled against his back, her arms circling his waist, trying to ignore how natural it felt, how right. They rode northeast into the rising sun, following a barely visible trail that wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. The land here was rougher than the open plains, broken by gullies and unexpected ravines, but Rowan guided the horse with confident ease, clearly familiar with this kind of terrain. They rode in silence for the first hour, both of them listening intently for sounds of pursuit, but the morning remained quiet except for the whisper of wind through grass and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Tell me about yourself, Evelyn said finally, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. About your life before you found me in that storm. She felt rather than saw his slight smile. Not much to tell. I've worked ranches most of my life. Montana, Wyoming, even down in Colorado for a spell. Never stayed in one place too long. Always felt like I was looking for something, though I couldn't have told you what. No family? His shoulders tensed slightly beneath her hands. Had a father once. Still do, technically, though we haven't spoken in years. He had different ideas about what my life should look like, about duty and legacy and carrying on the family name. There was old bitterness in his voice. I wanted to make my own way, earn my place through work rather than inheritance. He called me a fool and a waste. So I left. That must have been hard. Freedom usually is. He paused, then added more softly, What about you? You mentioned a father last night, but no mother. She died 5 years ago, Evelyn said, feeling the familiar ache of that loss. Fever took her in the winter. After that, everything fell apart. My father started drinking, gambling, making bad decisions. We lost our farm, had to move from town to town looking for work, and then... She swallowed hard. Then he met Silas Garner. Saw a way to clear his debts and secure his own future, all at the cost of mine. You have other family? Siblings? Anyone who might help? I had a sister once. Sarah. She died when she was 9, scarlet fever. It was just the two of us after that, me and my father, and we were never close. He wanted a son, someone to carry on his name and work his land. Instead, he got me, and I was never quite good enough. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, his loss, you're plenty good enough. The simple certainty in his voice made something warm bloom in Evelyn's chest, easing some of the old hurt she'd carried for so long. They rode on through the morning, the sun climbing higher in a sky scrubbed clean by last night's storm. The land began to change as they moved north, more trees appearing, cottonwoods and willows marking the presence of water nearby. The air smelled different here, greener and somehow more alive. Around midday, Rowan called a halt near a small creek that bubbled over smooth stones. He helped Evelyn down carefully, making sure she kept weight off her injured ankle, then tended to the horse while she washed the trail dust from her face and hands. How much farther? She asked when he returned with the food bundle Tom had provided. Another 4, maybe 5 hours if we keep a steady pace. He settled onto a sun-warmed rock and began dividing the food. Hard bread, dried meat, cheese, and 2 apples. We should reach the cabin by late afternoon. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the creek and the wind. Evelyn found herself studying Rowan in the clear light of day, noticing things she'd missed in last night's chaos. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work, the way he held himself, confident but not arrogant, aware but not tense. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her staring. She felt heat rise in her cheeks but didn't look away. "I was thinking that I'm glad it was you who found me last night. That if I had to trust a stranger with my life, I'm grateful it was someone like you." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something about who I am, about my family." But before he could continue, the black horse's head came up sharply, ears pricked forward. Rowan was on his feet instantly, one hand on his gun, his body positioned between Evelyn and whatever had alerted the animal. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then Evelyn heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders, coming from the south. "They found the trail," Rowan said tersely. "We need to move. Now." He pulled Evelyn to her feet and practically threw her onto the horse, mounting behind her with fluid speed. They were moving before she could even secure her grip, the black horse surging into a gallop that ate up the ground with long, powerful strides. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew louder. Evelyn risked a glance back and felt her heart drop. 4 riders, maybe 5, visible now through breaks in the trees, too far back to see clearly, but close enough that escape was no longer certain. "Hold on," Rowan commanded, and urged the horse faster. They crashed through underbrush, jumped fallen logs, splashed through shallow streams. Branches whipped past Evelyn's face, and she ducked low against Rowan's chest, trusting him to see the path ahead. His arm was an iron band around her waist, holding her secure even as the world became a blur of green and brown and the thunder of hooves. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to slow. Rowan guided the horse up a steep embankment, the animal's hooves scrabbling for purchase on loose stone. At the top, he pulled them to a brief halt, scanning the landscape with urgent intensity. "There," he said, pointing. "See that rocky outcropping? There's a narrow passage behind it that leads to a canyon system. If we can make it there before they spot us, we can lose them in the maze." "And if we can't?" His jaw tightened. "Then we fight." They plunged down the far side of the embankment, the horse sliding the last few feet in a shower of gravel. The rocky outcropping loomed ahead, massive and ancient, its face split by what looked like a solid wall, but was actually, Evelyn saw as they drew closer, a cleverly disguised gap barely wide enough for a horse and rider. Rowan aimed them straight for it. They entered the gap at a reckless pace, rock walls rising on either side so close Evelyn could have touched them both at once. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into stone, cutting off the sky until they rode through a corridor of shadow, punctuated by strips of brilliant blue overhead. Behind them, shouts echoed off the rocks. Their pursuers had seen them enter. But the passage was too narrow for multiple riders, forcing Garner's men into single file, buying precious time. The corridor opened suddenly into a small canyon, its walls soaring hundreds of feet overhead. Rowan didn't hesitate, guiding them across the sandy floor and into another passage on the far side. This one climbed steeply, the horse's breath coming in great heaving gasps as it powered up the incline. They emerged onto a high mesa, windswept and exposed, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. And there, perhaps 2 miles distant across the broken landscape, Evelyn saw it. A small structure nestled against a hillside, barely visible against the surrounding stone. "The cabin," Rowan confirmed. "Almost there." But almost was still too far. The first of Garner's men burst from the canyon passage behind them, shouting in triumph as he spotted them on the open mesa. Within moments, the others would follow. "We won't make it," Evelyn said, stating the obvious. "Yes, we will." Rowan's voice was grim but determined. "This horse has more heart than any 5 normal animals. He'll get us there. Trust me." The black horse seemed to understand the urgency, finding reserves of strength Evelyn wouldn't have believed possible. They flew across the mesa, hooves barely touching ground, the wind screaming past them like a living thing. Behind them, Garner's men gave chase, spreading out now that they had room, trying to flank them, cut them off. One of them raised a rifle, and Evelyn heard the crack of gunfire, saw dust kick up 20 feet to their left. "They're shooting at us," she said, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "Warning shots," Rowan replied. "Garner wants you alive, remember? They're just trying to spook us into stopping." Another shot, closer this time. The black horse's ears flattened, but he didn't slow, driven by his rider's will and his own proud heart. The cabin was closer now, 100 yards, 50, 20. Rowan pulled the horse to a sliding stop directly in front of the weathered door, was off and reaching for Evelyn before they'd fully halted. He lifted her down, pushed her toward the entrance. "Inside! Bar the door behind me!" "What are you going to do?" "Buy us time! Go!" He slapped the horse's rump, sending the exhausted animal around the back of the cabin, then positioned himself in front of the doorway with his gun drawn and his expression like carved granite. Evelyn wanted to protest, to refuse to hide while he faced danger alone. But Garner's men were nearly upon them. She could see their faces now, see the ugly triumph in Wade Miller's eyes, as he thought he had them cornered. She stumbled into the cabin, her injured ankle screaming protest, and threw the heavy wooden bar across the door just as the first rider pulled up outside. "Rowan Cross!" Wade Miller's voice carried clearly through the weathered walls. "You're harboring stolen property. Send the woman out and we'll let you ride away. Keep her, and things get difficult." Through a gap in the wall where the chinking had fallen away, Evelyn could see Rowan standing calm and steady, his gun held low but ready. "The only property I see here is that horse you're riding, and from the way you're treating him, I'd say you don't deserve to own it. Don't be a fool. That woman belongs to Silas Garner. He has legal claim." "Funny kind of legal claim that requires you to chase an unwilling woman across half of Wyoming," Rowan replied. "Where I come from, we call that kidnapping." Wade's face flushed with anger. "This is your last warning. Send her out, or we come in and take her." "You're welcome to try." The four men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They had numbers on their side, but Rowan had position. The cabin's narrow door meant they could only come at him one or two at a time, and he'd already demonstrated he wasn't easily intimidated. "You know who Silas Garner is?" Wade tried a different tack. "What he's capable of. You're making an enemy of a very powerful man." "I've made enemies before." "Still standing." "But for how long?" Wade leaned forward in his saddle, his expression turning sly. "See, we did some asking around about you, Mr. Cross. Or should I say, Mr. Rowan Cross of the Cross Cattle Company. Son of Edmund Cross, who owns near about 50,000 acres from here to Montana." Evelyn's breath caught. 50,000 acres? That would make Rowan's family one of the largest landholders in the territory. Why hadn't he said anything? Rowan's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw his shoulders tense fractionally. "My father's holdings are none of your concern." Oh, but they are," Wade said with malicious satisfaction. "Because I'm betting a man like Edmund Cross would be real interested to know his only son is playing house with a runaway bride in an abandoned cabin. I'm betting he'd have opinions about that. Might even cut his disappointment of a son off completely, leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a woman who isn't even legally his." "My relationship with my father ended years ago," Rowan said flatly. "There's nothing you can threaten me with there." "Maybe not. But what about her?" Wade jerked his chin toward the cabin. "What happens to Miss Hart when word gets out she's been traveling alone with a man, spending nights in relay stations and abandoned cabins? No respectable man would touch her after that. Her reputation would be ruined, and without reputation, a woman's got nothing in this territory." Evelyn felt cold horror wash through her. He was right. The rules that governed women's lives were harsh and unforgiving. Even running from forced marriage, even with the best of intentions, the mere appearance of impropriety could destroy her chances of ever building a decent life. But before she could despair, Rowan's voice cut through the stillness, clear and strong, and absolutely certain. "Then I guess it's a good thing she really is my wife." Silence fell like a thunderclap. Even Wade seemed momentarily stunned. "You're bluffing," he finally said. The marshal might have believed that story last night, but we know different. Do you? Rowan smiled, cold and sharp. Because from where I'm standing, I've got a woman I claimed as my wife in front of a U.S. Marshal, spent the night in a relay station with her as man and wife, and am now defending my property. Yes, I said my property, because that's what marriage means under territorial law, against men who are threatening to kidnap her. So tell me, Wade, who's going to believe your version when mine has all the legal weight? Wade's face went purple with rage, but before he could respond, one of his companions, a younger man with nervous eyes, spoke up. Wade, maybe we should head back. Tell Mr. Garner the situation. Let him figure out the legal angle. Shut up, Danny. No, listen. If they're actually married, or even if they're just claiming to be married, we can't just take her. That's kidnapping for real, and we could hang for it. I said shut up. Wade whirled on the younger man, his hand dropping to his gun. It was the opening Rowan needed. He moved with lightning speed, closing the distance to Wade's horse and grabbing the man's gun arm before the foreman could draw. With a sharp twist, he yanked Wade from the saddle, sending him crashing to the ground. Right away, Rowan said to the other three men, his voice like winter frost. Right away right now, or your boss loses his foreman permanently. The nervous young man, Danny, was already turning his horse. The other two hesitated, but when Rowan cocked his gun with Wade's neck under his boot, they followed Danny's lead, backing their horses away slowly. This isn't over, Wade gasped from the ground. Garner will destroy you for this, both of you. Maybe, Rowan agreed, but not today. He released Wade and stepped back, gun still trained on the man. You've got 10 seconds to get on that horse and follow your friends. After that, I stop being reasonable. Wade scrambled up, his face twisted with humiliation and fury, and mounted his horse with jerky, aggressive movements. You've made an enemy today, Cross. One you'll regret. Add him to the list. As Wade galloped away after his companions, Rowan stood watching until they disappeared over the mesa's edge. Only then did he lower his gun, his shoulders sagging slightly with released tension. Evelyn threw open the cabin door and rushed out, ignoring the pain in her ankle. Are you hurt? No. He holstered his gun and caught her arm, steadying her. But we need to talk. About what Wade said, about who I am. I should have told you before. That you're rich? Evelyn shook her head. It doesn't matter, Rowan. You could be the King of England for all I care. You still risked everything to help me. It matters because of what it means. His grip on her arms tightened. Wade was right about one thing. My father is powerful, and he's ruthless. If he finds out about this, about you, he'll use every resource he has to separate us. He'll twist the truth, bribe officials, manufacture evidence, all to protect the family name from the scandal of his son taking up with a runaway woman. Then we won't tell him. Evelyn, no, listen to me. She reached up, cupping his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I don't care about your father or your inheritance or any of that. All I care about is that you're the first person in years, maybe ever, who's treated me like I matter, who's seen me as something more than property or disappointment or burden. And I won't let anyone take that away. Not Silas Garner, not your father, not anyone. For a long moment, Rowan just stared at her, something vulnerable and wondering in his storm gray eyes. Then, very slowly, he covered her hands with his own. 6 years ago, you saved me from drowning, he said softly. Last night I returned the favor, but this, right here, right now, this feels like something different, something more. Like what? Like maybe we were supposed to find each other. Like maybe all the running and searching and wandering was leading to this moment. He smiled, just slightly. Or maybe I'm just a fool who's talking nonsense because I haven't slept in 24 hours. If you're a fool, then so am I. Evelyn found herself smiling back despite everything, despite the danger, the fear, the impossibility of their situation. Because standing here with you feels more real than anything else in my life ever has. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Above them, clouds were gathering again, promising another storm by nightfall. But for this one perfect moment, everything was still and clear and filled with possibility. Rowan's thumb traced the scar on her palm one more time, then he stepped back with visible reluctance. Come on, let's get inside before those men decide to come back with reinforcements. We've got planning to do and limited time to do it. The cabin's interior was better than Evelyn had expected. Dusty and cobweb-laden, yes, but structurally sound. There was a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a single bed frame in the corner, its mattress long since carried off by mice. Shelves lined one wall, empty except for a few forgotten tools and a tin coffee pot that had seen better days. While Rowan went to check on the horse and secure the perimeter, Evelyn found a broom made of bound twigs and began sweeping, needing to do something useful with her nervous energy. By the time Rowan returned carrying their supplies and his saddlebags, she'd managed to clear the worst of the dust and open the shutters to let in fresh air. "It's not much," she said apologetically, suddenly seeing the cabin through his eyes, the wealthy rancher's son forced to hide in a near ruin because of her. "It's perfect," Rowan replied, and seemed to mean it. He set down the supplies and immediately began building a fire in the hearth, coaxing flames from dry wood he found stacked in a protected corner. "Shelter, water from the well outside, and enough isolation that we can see anyone coming from miles away. Could be a lot worse." As the fire caught and began to spread warmth through the small space, Evelyn found herself studying Rowan again, this man who'd turned out to be so much more than the drifter she'd assumed him to be. "Tell me about your father," she said as she settled into one of the chairs, elevating her ankle as Rowan had instructed. "About why you left." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, feeding small sticks to the growing fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if he was choosing each word carefully. "Edmund Cross built his empire from nothing," he began. "Started with 100 head of cattle and a dream, turned it into the largest ranch in Wyoming territory through sheer will and ruthless business sense. He's a hard man, fair in his way, but absolutely unforgiving of weakness or sentiment. When my mother died giving birth to me, something in him hardened even further. He raised me to be his heir, to carry on his legacy, but he never let me forget that I'd cost him the one thing he truly loved." "That's not fair," Evelyn said softly. "You were just a baby." "Fair or not, that's how he saw it. And as I grew older, he became more demanding, wanted me to be exactly what he was, cold, calculating, willing to do whatever it took to expand our holdings and increase our wealth. He saw people as resources to be used, land as something to be conquered, and kindness as weakness to be stamped out." Rowan stood, moving to the window to stare out at the gathering darkness. "When I was 24, he arranged a marriage for me. Girl from a wealthy family back east. Someone who'd bring social connections and more capital to our operation. I'd never met her, didn't love her, didn't even particularly like the idea of her. But my opinion didn't matter. It was a business arrangement, pure and simple." "What did you do?" "I refused. Said I wouldn't marry someone I didn't love, wouldn't reduce marriage to a transaction. My father called me a fool and a romantic, said I was throwing away everything he'd built. I told him I didn't want what he'd built, not if it meant becoming like him. We had a terrible fight. Things were said that can't be unsaid. And at the end of it, I walked away. Left behind the inheritance, the name, everything. Started working as a ranch hand under assumed names, moving from place to place, trying to figure out who I was when I wasn't Edmund Cross's son." "And what did you find?" He turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "I found that I was good at the work, really good. Found that I liked earning my way through skill and effort rather than birthright. Found that there was satisfaction in honest labor that I'd never felt when managing my father's empire." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I found that there was a kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who helped people who needed help, who stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Someone the opposite of what my father tried to make me." Evelyn felt her heart swell with understanding and admiration. "You became the man you wanted to be, not the man you were told to be." Tried to, anyway. Rowan moved back to the fire, adding larger logs now that the flames were established. But Wade was right about one thing. My father has a long reach and a longer memory. If he finds out about us, about this situation, he'll see it as proof that I'm still the same foolish romantic who threw away his legacy for sentiment, and he'll do everything in his power to crush what we're building here, if only to prove he was right about me all along. So we make sure he doesn't find out. Evelyn, be realistic. Garner's men know who I am now. They'll report back and word will spread. In a territory this size, secrets don't stay secret for long, especially ones involving the Cross family name. She pushed herself up from the chair, wincing as her ankle protested, and crossed to where Rowan stood by the fire. Then we deal with it when it happens, together. That's what... She hesitated, then pressed forward. That's what married people do, isn't it? Face problems together? Is that what we are? Rowan asked softly, his eyes searching hers. Married. I know we told the marshal that, and Wade, and Tom. But it was all lies, wasn't it? A strategy to keep you safe? Was it? Evelyn reached out, took his hand in hers, felt the calloused strength of his fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. Because it doesn't feel like a lie, not anymore. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence between them with small sounds. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly against the roof. A gentler storm than the one that had brought them together, but steady and sure. No, Rowan agreed finally, his voice rough with emotion. It doesn't feel like a lie. He raised their joined hands, pressed his lips to her scarred palm in a gesture that felt like a vow, a promise, a claiming. And when he pulled her into his arms, when she melted against his chest and felt his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, whether they faced down Silas Garner or Edmund Cross or the entire Wyoming territory, they would face it together, as husband and wife. In truth, if not yet in law. In love, if not yet in words. The storm outside grew stronger, but inside the abandoned cabin, two people who'd saved each other's lives years apart finally found what they'd both been searching for. Home. Not in a place, but in each other. And that was worth fighting for. Worth everything. The rain fell through the night, steady and cleansing, washing away the dust of their desperate flight and leaving the world fresh and new by morning. Evelyn woke to find herself alone in the cabin, wrapped in Rowan's coat with the fire burned down to embers. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he left? Had everything been a dream? But then she heard the sound of an axe biting into wood outside, rhythmic and sure. She pushed herself up, testing her ankle. Still sore, but the swelling had gone down considerably. Through the cabin's single window, she could see Rowan chopping wood with his shirt sleeves rolled up, his movements efficient and practiced. The morning sun caught the planes of his face, highlighting the concentration there, and Evelyn found herself simply watching him, memorizing the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the sureness of his hands. He must have felt her gaze because he looked up suddenly, their eyes meeting across the distance. The smile that crossed his face was slow and genuine, transforming his usually serious expression into something that made her breath catch. "You're awake," he called, setting down the axe and crossing toward the cabin. "How's the ankle?" "Better." She met him at the door, suddenly shy in the morning light. Everything felt different now, more real, more weighted with possibility and consequence. "You've been busy. Figured we'd need firewood if we're staying more than a day or two, and I found the well. Water's clean and cold. Even spotted some wild onions growing nearby and what looks like the remains of an old vegetable garden. With some work, we could make this place livable." "How long are you thinking we'll stay?" Rowan's expression grew serious as he stepped inside, moving to rebuild the fire. "That depends on a lot of things. How long it takes your ankle to heal properly. How quickly Garner gives up the search. If he gives up at all. And..." He paused, then turned to face her directly. "And whether you want to keep running or whether you're ready to fight." "Fight?" Evelyn lowered herself into the chair, her heart beginning to pound. "Against Silas? Rowan, he has money, influence, connections. What could we possibly—" "We fight with the truth," Rowan interrupted. "We go to the territorial judge in Cheyenne, file legal documents stating that you were coerced into an engagement you never agreed to, that your father had no right to promise you to anyone against your will. We make it official that you're not Garner's property, that you never were. But the contract my father signed isn't worth the paper it's written on if we can prove coercion, and I'm betting we can." He crouched in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Evelyn, running will only work for so long. Eventually, Garner will find us, or we'll run out of places to hide. But if we face this head on, if we use the law instead of hiding from it, we might actually have a chance. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the legal system would protect her rather than viewing her as property to be returned to its rightful owner. But her experience had taught her that laws were made by men, for men, and women's voices rarely carried weight in courtrooms. What if the judge sides with my father? With Silas? Then we try something else, but at least we'll have made our stand. Rowan's grip on her hands tightened. I meant what I said yesterday. I'm not letting anyone take you back to that man. Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, you're under my protection now, and I don't break my promises. Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of approaching horses froze them both. Rowan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with his gun drawn. Evelyn felt her heart drop. Had Garner's men returned with reinforcements? Were they about to face a siege? But Rowan's tense shoulders relaxed slightly, though confusion replaced the wariness in his expression. It's just one rider, and unless I'm mistaken, that's Tom from the relay station. They watched through the window as the old man dismounted stiffly, looking around the cabin's clearing with assessing eyes. Rowan holstered his gun and opened the door. Tom, what brings you all the way out here? Tom's weathered face was grave. Trouble. The kind I figured you'd want to know about sooner rather than later. He glanced at Evelyn, then back to Rowan. Can I come in? This isn't a conversation for outdoors. Once inside, with a cup of coffee made from the supplies Tom had brought warming his hands, the old man laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. Garner went to the territorial marshal in Buffalo, filed official complaints against both of you, theft of property, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud. Got himself a warrant issued for Miss Hart's arrest, and one for you as an accomplice. Evelyn's blood ran cold. A warrant? But we haven't done anything wrong. Doesn't matter if it's true. Only matters if he can make it look true. And Garner's got money enough to make most anything look however he wants. Tom took a long sip of his coffee. Word is he's hiring more men, not just ranch hands this time, but professional trackers and bounty hunters, offering a substantial reward for your return, Miss Hart, and another for Mr. Cross's capture. How substantial? Rowan asked quietly. $500 for her, $200 for you, dead or alive, though I expect he'd prefer alive so he can make examples out of you both. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. $700 was more money than most people in the territory would see in 5 years of hard work. That kind of reward would bring every desperate man within 100 miles down on their heads. There's more, Tom continued, his expression growing even graver. Your father got word somehow. Edmund Cross. He arrived in Buffalo yesterday, asking questions about you. Seems Wade Miller's report reached him quicker than we thought. Rowan's jaw clenched, the only sign of the tension Evelyn could feel radiating from him. What did he want? To talk to you, he claimed. Said something about family business that needed settling. But Tom Jr., you remember my nephew who works at the Buffalo Hotel? He said your father met with Garner for over an hour yesterday evening. Whatever they discussed, it wasn't friendly. Your father left looking like a thundercloud, and Garner looked smug as a cat in cream. They're working together, Evelyn whispered, horror dawning. Your father and Silas, they've made some kind of arrangement. Not necessarily working together, Tom corrected, but not working against each other either, which amounts to the same thing in practical terms. Two powerful men who both want something from you. That's a dangerous combination. Rowan moved to the window, staring out at the peaceful morning landscape, as if he could see his father's approach in the distance. Did my father say where he was staying? How long he planned to be in Buffalo? At the Grand Hotel, indefinitely. Left word that if you wanted to talk, he'd make himself available. But Tom Jr. said to tell you to be careful. Your father brought his lawyer with him, and that man doesn't travel for social calls. The implications hung heavy in the air. Edmund Cross didn't just want to talk. He wanted to do business, which likely meant negotiations, contracts, legal maneuvering. All the tools he'd used to build his empire, now potentially turned toward destroying his son's chance at happiness. I need to go see him, Rowan said finally, turning from the window. Face this head on before he and Garner cook up something worse between them. No. Evelyn was on her feet despite her uncle's protest, moving to his side. That's exactly what they want, to separate us, deal with us individually. Together we're strong. Alone, we're vulnerable. She's right, Tom agreed. You walk into Buffalo alone, There's nothing stopping them from arresting you on that warrant, throwing you in jail, and taking Miss Hart by force while you're locked up and helpless. So what do you suggest? Rowan's frustration was evident. We can't just hide here forever, and we can't fight both Garner and my father without some kind of plan. Tom was quiet for a moment, then, there might be another option. Judge Morrison, the territorial judge I mentioned, he's a fair man, known for not being swayed by money or influence. He's also a friend of my late wife's family, owes me a favor or two. If I could get word to him, explain your situation privately, he might be willing to hear your case before Garner's warrants can be served. Would he do that? Evelyn asked, hardly daring to hope. Override the warrants? He can't override them, but he can expedite a hearing, get you in front of a proper court where you can tell your story before bounty hunters drag you back in chains. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Rowan looked at Evelyn, a question in his storm-gray eyes. This was her decision as much as his, her freedom, her future, her risk to take or refuse. She thought about running, about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never settling, never building anything permanent. She thought about the cabin, about the peace she'd felt working alongside Rowan to make it livable. She thought about the way he'd looked at her last night, like she was something precious worth protecting. Let's do it, she said firmly. Let's fight. Tom nodded approval and rose to leave. I'll ride to Cheyenne today, talk to Morrison. With luck, I can get you a hearing within the week. In the meantime, you two stay hidden. Don't go into any towns, don't talk to any strangers. The fewer people who know where you are, the better. After Tom left, promising to return with news as soon as he had any, Rowan and Evelyn stood together in the cabin's doorway, watching him ride away across the mesa. Are you scared? Rowan asked quietly. Terrified, Evelyn admitted. But also determined. For the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something instead of just running from it. That feels different, stronger. You are strong, strongest person I've ever met. He turned to her, tucking a strand of loose hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. Most people would have broken under the pressure you've been carrying, but you're still here, still standing, still fighting. That takes courage I'm not sure I could manage in your position. You managed it when you walked away from your father's empire. That took courage too. Maybe we're both braver together than we could be alone. It was a simple statement, but it held so much truth that Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. She leaned into his touch, letting herself take comfort from his presence, his solidity, his unwavering commitment to her safety. What do we do now? She asked. While we wait for Tom's news. Rowan smiled, and again she saw that transformation of his features that made her heart skip. Now? We work. If we're going to be hiding here for days, might as well make it comfortable. Besides, physical labor helps clear the mind, gives you something to focus on besides worry. He wasn't wrong. Over the next several days, they fell into a routine that was both exhausting and oddly peaceful. Rowan repaired the cabin's roof where rain had begun to leak through, replaced broken boards in the floor, and reinforced the door with iron brackets he fashioned from old tools left behind by the cabin's previous owner. Evelyn, working within the limitations of her healing ankle, cleaned every surface until the interior gleamed, sorted through the abandoned supplies to find what was still usable, and even managed to coax life back into the old vegetable garden, planting seeds Tom had left them. They worked mostly in companionable silence, but occasionally one of them would speak, sharing stories from their past, dreams for their futures, observations about the world that revealed the depths of their characters. Evelyn learned that Rowan had taught himself to read from his mother's books, that he had a gift for working with horses that bordered on the supernatural, that he'd once spent an entire winter living alone in a mountain cabin and had come away from the experience both humbled and strengthened. Rowan learned that Evelyn had wanted to be a teacher before her family's fortunes collapsed, that she could identify every bird by its call and most plants by their leaves, that she'd once talked a band of Cheyenne hunters out of raiding her father's farm by offering them food and respect when other settlers would have responded with bullets. On the third day, while Rowan was fetching water from the well, Evelyn found the old cloth in his saddlebag, the one she'd used 6 years ago to bind his wounds after pulling him from the river. He'd kept it all this time, carried it with him through years of wandering, a talisman of the woman who'd saved his life. She was holding it when he returned, tears streaming down her face. "You kept it," she whispered. "All these years you kept it." Rowan set down the water bucket and crossed to her, gently taking the cloth from her hands. "It was all I had of you. The only proof that you were real and not just a fever dream. I used to take it out sometimes, when the world felt too big and I felt too lost, and remind myself that somewhere out there was a woman who'd cared enough about a stranger to save his life. It gave me hope that maybe I could be that kind of person too. You became better than that kind of person. You became the man who saved me. We saved each other." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "That's what makes this work. We're equals. Partners. Not one person rescuing the other, but both of us choosing to stand together." That night, as they sat by the fire sharing the simple meal they'd prepared, Evelyn found herself watching Rowan's hands as he ate. The same hands that had pulled her from the storm, wrapped her injured ankle, wielded an axe and hammer to make their shelter stronger. Capable hands. Kind hands. Hands she wanted to hold for the rest of her life. "Tell me about your mother," she said impulsively. "You said she died when you were born, but you must have learned something about her. From your father, or from people who knew her." Rowan was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he might not answer. Then, "Her name was Catherine. She came from Boston, wealthy family, cultured and educated, everything my father's rough frontier existence wasn't. Her family was horrified when she announced she was marrying a rancher and moving west, but she did it anyway. People said she was the only person who could soften my father, who could make him laugh, who reminded him that there was more to life than accumulation and conquest." "She sounds remarkable." She was, by all accounts. My father kept one photograph of her, the only sentimental thing in his entire house. I used to sneak looks at it when I was a boy, trying to see myself in her features. She had kind eyes. That's what I remember most from that photograph, eyes that looked like they'd never met a person they couldn't find good in. "You have her eyes," Evelyn said softly. "Not the color, maybe, but the quality. The way you look at people like you're trying to see the best in them, even when they don't deserve it." "Is that how I look at you?" "Sometimes. Other times you look at me like—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "Like what?" "Like I'm the answer to a question you've been asking your whole life." Rowan set down his plate and moved closer, settling beside her on the floor near the fire. "Maybe you are. Maybe that's exactly what you are." He kissed her then, softly at first, a question rather than a demand. Evelyn answered by threading her fingers through his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless and the world outside the cabin ceased to exist. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "Evelyn, I know we barely know each other. I know this whole situation is complicated and dangerous and maybe crazy. But I need you to know what I feel for you. It's not just about protection or obligation or even gratitude. It's love," Evelyn finished for him, her voice barely a whisper. "It's love. I know because I feel it too. Impossible and improbable and completely illogical, but real, so real. You love me? I think I've loved you since you appeared out of that storm. Or maybe since 6 years ago when you were just a stranger drowning in a river. I don't know when it started, but I know it's true." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, needing him to see the truth in hers. "I love you, Rowan Cross, and that terrifies me more than anything Silas Garner could do." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because now I have so much more to lose." He understood. She could see it in the way his expression shifted from joy to something more complex, more weighted with the same fear she felt. But underneath the fear was determination, that iron core of resolve she'd come to recognize as the foundation of who he was. "Then we make sure you don't lose it," he said firmly. "We fight smarter, we stay ahead of our enemies, and we protect what we've found together, whatever it takes." On the 5th day, they woke to find fresh horse tracks in the mud near the well. Someone had been watching the cabin during the night. Rowan followed the tracks for a mile before they disappeared into rocky ground, his expression grim when he returned. "Scouts," he said tersely. "Either Garner's men or bounty hunters. They know we're here. Should we run?" "To where?" We don't know how many of them there are, which directions they're covering, what kind of trap they might be setting. He paced the cabin's length, thinking hard. No, running blind would be worse than staying put. At least here we have defensible position and supplies. But neither of them slept well that night, jumping at every sound, weapons close at hand. The cabin that had felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap, its isolation a vulnerability rather than a strength. Tom returned on the sixth day, riding hard and looking worried. Judge Morrison agreed to hear your case, day after tomorrow in Cheyenne. But there's conditions. You have to turn yourselves into the marshal's custody, let him transport you to the hearing. Morrison won't be seen as harboring fugitives, even if the charges are bogus. That's insane, Evelyn protested. The moment we turn ourselves in, Garner will... Morrison thought of that. He's issuing a protective order. Anyone who interferes with your transport or tries to take you before the hearing will face federal charges. It's not perfect, but it's the best protection he can offer under the circumstances. Rowan looked at Evelyn, the question clear in his eyes. This was it, the moment they had to decide whether to trust the system or keep running. We go, Evelyn said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. We go to Cheyenne, we tell our story, and we let the judge decide. It's time to stop hiding. They spent that night preparing for the journey, gathering what few possessions they had, memorizing the details of their story to make sure their accounts matched. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, Rowan pulled something from his pocket, a thin silver ring worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said quietly, holding it out to Evelyn. The only thing of hers I took when I left my father's house. I know we've been saying we're married, but it's all been pretend, legal fiction, and I know this isn't the time or place for grand romantic gestures, but he swallowed hard, his eyes meeting hers with raw vulnerability. But I want it to be real. Not just because it protects you legally, but because I want you to be mine, and I want to be yours. Truly. In every way that matters. Evelyn's hands trembled as she took the ring, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Not just a symbol, but a commitment, a future, a promise that no matter what happened tomorrow or the next day, they belonged to each other. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Truly. In every way that matters. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand, and then pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And maybe she was. Maybe that was the real truth neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, knowing it might be the last peaceful moment they'd have for a long time. Every touch was a vow, every kiss a promise, every whispered word a prayer that somehow, against all odds, they'd find their way through the storm ahead. When morning came, they rode out together to meet the marshal at a designated point 10 miles south. Evelyn wore the silver ring openly now, no longer pretending, no longer hiding. Whatever happened next, she was Rowan Cross's wife. In heart, if not yet in law. In truth, if not yet on paper. The marshal was younger than Evelyn expected, with hard eyes but a fair expression. Miss Hart, Mr. Cross, or should I say Mrs. Cross? The warrant says Miss Hart, but Tom claims you two are married. We are, Rowan said firmly, his arm around Evelyn's waist. Married 6 months ago in Montana Territory. The fact that Silas Garner refuses to accept it doesn't make it less true. That's for the judge to decide. The marshal gestured to 2 other riders with him. You'll ride between my deputies. No tricks, no attempts to escape, and we'll get you to Cheyenne in one piece. I've got Judge Morrison's protective order here, and I take it seriously. But if you give me trouble, that order won't save you. Understood? They understood. And so they rode toward Cheyenne, toward judgment, toward whatever future awaited them in that courtroom. The journey took the better part of 2 days, and every mile was tense with possibility. Would Garner's men attack? Would bounty hunters try to claim the reward? Would they even make it to the hearing alive? But the miles passed without incident, the protective order apparently enough to hold potential attackers at bay. As they crested the final hill and saw Cheyenne spread out below them, its buildings glowing in the late afternoon sun, Evelyn felt Rowan's hand find hers, their fingers linking despite the marshal's watchful eyes. Whatever happens in there, he murmured, I meant every word I said. You're my wife, Evelyn Cross. and I'll fight heaven and hell before I let anyone take you from me." "I know," she whispered back. "I believe you." The town of Cheyenne bustled with activity as they rode down the main street, drawing curious stares from townspeople who recognized the marshal and his prisoners. Word had spread, the runaway bride and the rich rancher's son, riding to judgment together. People lined the streets to watch them pass, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with judgment, most just curious about the scandal that had been the talk of the territory for days. The courthouse was an imposing brick building at the town's center, its steps crowded with spectators and reporters hoping to witness the hearing. The marshal led them around to a side entrance, avoiding the crowd, and deposited them in a small holding room to wait. "Judge Morrison will see you in an hour," he said. "Your lawyer should be here any minute." "Lawyer?" Evelyn looked at Rowan in confusion. "We don't have a lawyer." "Tom arranged one," the marshal explained. "Said you'd need representation, and he called in another favor. Fellow named Harrison, sharp as they come, doesn't like bullies or men who treat women like property. You could do worse." When the lawyer arrived, he was nothing like what Evelyn had imagined. Young, barely 30, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers, but his eyes were intelligent and his handshake firm. "Matthew Harrison," he introduced himself. "Tom gave me the basics of your case, but I need to hear it directly from you. Every detail, no matter how small. We have 45 minutes to build a defense that can stand against whatever Garner and his lawyers throw at us." They talked rapidly, Harrison taking notes in swift shorthand, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions that helped clarify important points. By the time the marshal returned to escort them to the courtroom, the lawyer looked grimly satisfied. "It's a strong case," he said. "Coercion, lack of consent, evidence of Garner's violent history with his previous wives. But the judge will want proof, and much of what we have is circumstantial. The key will be your testimony, Mrs. Cross. If you can make Morrison believe you, if you can make him see the truth of what you've been running from, we have a chance." "Mrs. Cross?" The marshal's eyebrows rose. "So the marriage is real?" "As real as any that matters," Harrison replied smoothly, "which makes the charges of theft and fraud rather difficult to sustain, doesn't it? Can't steal what's already your own wife." The courtroom was packed when they entered, every seat filled with spectators eager to witness the drama. Evelyn's eyes immediately found Silas Garner sitting in the front row, his expression cold and confident. Beside him sat an expensive-looking lawyer, and to Evelyn's shock, her own father, looking older and more broken than she remembered, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. But it was the man sitting across the aisle that made Rowan go rigid beside her. Edmund Cross was everything his son had described, and more. Tall, silver-haired, with a face carved from stone and eyes like winter ice. He watched them enter with no visible emotion, but Evelyn could feel the weight of his judgment like a physical force. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison." The judge was an older man, perhaps 60, with a kind face weathered by years of hearing humanity's worst brought before his bench. But his eyes were sharp and missed nothing as he surveyed the crowded courtroom. "This hearing concerns the matter of Evelyn Hart and her alleged engagement to Mr. Silas Garner," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "We're also addressing charges of theft and fraud filed by Mr. Garner against both Miss Hart and Mr. Rowan Cross. This is not a trial, it's a hearing to determine whether these charges have merit and whether Miss Hart should be compelled to honor an agreement made on her behalf." He paused, his gaze moving between Evelyn and Rowan. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents, and I have questions. Many questions. We'll start with Mr. Garner. Sir, please present your case." Garner's lawyer stood, smooth and practiced, and laid out a version of events that bore only passing resemblance to the truth. In his telling, Evelyn was a spoiled young woman who'd agreed to marry his client, then changed her mind at the last moment and fled with a stolen horse. Rowan was portrayed as a drifter who'd seduced her away from her obligations, probably intending to ransom her back or claim the reward money for himself. "The contract between Mr. Garner and Miss Hart's father is legal and binding," the lawyer concluded. She had every opportunity to object before the agreement was signed. Her flight represents breach of contract and theft of valuable property. We ask that she be returned to Mr. Garner's custody immediately and that Mr. Cross face charges for his interference. Judge Morrison listened without expression, then turned to Harrison. Counselor, your response? Matthew Harrison stood, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried conviction that made people lean forward to hear. Your Honor, the fundamental question here isn't whether a contract exists, it's whether that contract ever had moral or legal validity. My client, Mrs. Evelyn Cross, and yes, I said Mrs. Cross, as she is legally married to Mr. Rowan Cross, never consented to engagement or marriage with Mr. Garner. Her father signed that contract without her knowledge or approval, treating her like property to be sold for his debts. That's not contract law, that's human trafficking, which is illegal even in Wyoming territory. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Garner's face flushed red with anger, but the judge raised a hand for silence. You claim Mrs. Cross, if that is indeed her name, is married to Mr. Rowan Cross. Do you have documentation to support this claim? This was the moment everything hinged on. Harrison looked at Rowan, who stood slowly. Your Honor, I understand the court's need for documentation, but in the Montana territory where we were married, many marriages are recorded only in church registers or family Bibles, especially in remote areas. The fact that we don't have official papers doesn't make our marriage less real or less legally binding. We've lived as husband and wife, presented ourselves as married to multiple witnesses, including a U.S. Marshal, and my wife wears my mother's ring as proof of our commitment. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. What I can document is this. I'm the one who saved Evelyn from a storm when she was fleeing for her life. I'm the one who's protected her, provided for her, and stood beside her when she had no one else. That's what marriage means. Not a piece of paper, but a commitment to stand together no matter what. That's what we have. Pretty words, Garner's lawyer sneered. But without documentation, Mr. Hart, Judge Morrison interrupted, turning to Evelyn's father, who'd been sitting silent and miserable throughout the proceedings. You're the one who signed this contract with Mr. Garner. Did your daughter consent to this arrangement? Robert Hart finally raised his head, and Evelyn saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, whether from drink or tears she couldn't tell. For a long moment he was silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, No, she didn't consent. I didn't ask her, I owed so much money, and Garner offered a way out. I told myself she'd come to accept it, that she'd understand I did it for her own good. But the truth is, I did it for me, to save myself from my own mistakes. He looked at Evelyn then, and she saw genuine anguish in his face. I'm sorry, Evie. God help me. I'm so sorry. The courtroom erupted. Garner was on his feet shouting at Hart, calling him a traitor and a liar. His lawyer was trying to salvage the case, arguing that Hart's testimony was coerced. But Judge Morrison's gavel came down like thunder, silencing them all. Mr. Garner, control yourself or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. The judge's eyes were hard as flint now. Mr. Hart, you've just admitted to entering a contract on behalf of someone who did not consent. That alone is grounds for voiding the agreement. He turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Cross, or Miss Hart, whichever you prefer, please approach the bench. Evelyn stood on shaking legs, Rowan's hand steadying her as she walked forward. Up close, Judge Morrison's face was even kinder than it had appeared from a distance, etched with years of wisdom and compassion. Young lady, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you married to Mr. Cross? And before you answer, know that lying to this court is a serious offense, but also know that I'm more interested in justice than in legal technicalities. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the weight of the silver ring on her finger, the weight of Rowan's steady gaze on her back. Your Honor, I love Rowan Cross. He saved my life when I was running from a fate worse than death. He's protected me, respected me, treated me like I matter as a person rather than as property. We said vows to each other under the stars, promised ourselves to each other in every way that counts. If that's not marriage, then I don't know what is. The paperwork can come later. The commitment is already there. Judge Morrison studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He raised his voice to address the full courtroom. I'm ruling that the contract between Robert Hart and Silas Garner is null and void based on lack of consent from the individual it concerned. Miss Hart, Mrs. Cross, is free to marry whom she chooses, And if she chooses Mr. Rowan Cross, that's her right. The charges of theft and fraud are dismissed as without merit. His gavel came down with finality. This hearing is concluded. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then the courtroom exploded into chaos, some people cheering, others arguing, reporters rushing for the exits to file their stories. Evelyn felt Rowan's arms around her, lifting her off her feet in a spinning embrace while tears streamed down both their faces. "It's over," she gasped. "It's really over." "Not quite," said a cold voice. They turned to find Edmund Cross standing behind them, his expression unreadable. Up close, the resemblance between father and son was striking, same strong features, same gray eyes. But where Rowan's eyes held warmth and compassion, his father's held only calculated assessment. "Mr. Cross," Judge Morrison said warningly, "if you're planning to cause trouble—" "No trouble, Your Honor, just a father wanting a word with his son, in private, if possible." Rowan's arm tightened around Evelyn's waist. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my wife." Something flickered across Edmund's face. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "Very well. Then I'll say this in front of witnesses. You won that ruling today, Rowan. Won your freedom, won your woman, won your little crusade against men like me who make hard choices for practical reasons. Congratulations." "But?" Rowan prompted, because they both knew there was a but coming. "But you're still my son, still heir to everything I've built, whether you want it or not. And sooner or later, you're going to have to decide who you really are. The idealist playing at poverty, or a cross with responsibilities that go beyond personal happiness." "I already know who I am," Rowan replied steadily. "I'm Evelyn's husband. That's all the identity I need." Edmund's lips thinned. "We'll see how long that lasts when reality sets in. When you're both living hand to mouth, when the money runs out and the romance fades. When she realizes she traded one form of captivity for another, poverty instead of wealth, but captivity nonetheless." "Father," Rowan said, and his voice was sad rather than angry, "I hope someday you understand that love isn't captivity. It's freedom, the only real freedom I've ever known." He turned away then, guiding Evelyn toward the exit, leaving his father standing alone in the emptying courtroom. They emerged into the late afternoon sunlight to find Tom waiting with their horses, a broad smile on his weathered face. "Congratulations," he said simply. "Both of you." "Thank you," Evelyn managed, still feeling dazed by the speed of events. "For everything. We couldn't have done this without you." "You did it yourselves. I just opened a few doors." Tom handed Rowan a small leather purse. "Take this. It's not much, but it'll get you wherever you're headed next. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." As they rode out of Cheyenne, leaving behind the courthouse and the crowds and the life Evelyn had almost been forced into, she found herself crying again, but this time from joy rather than fear, from relief rather than despair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and ahead of them lay the open frontier, full of possibility and promise. "Where do we go now?" she asked Rowan as they paused on a hill overlooking the town. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not uncertainty, but absolute certainty. "Home. Back to that cabin by the river. We'll fix it up properly, make it ours. Build a life there, together. It won't be easy, and it won't be wealthy, but it'll be honest, real, worth living." Evelyn reached for his hand, twining her fingers through his, feeling the solid reality of his presence, the rightness of their joined future. "Then that's where we'll go. Home." And as they rode north toward the setting sun, toward the cabin that waited to be transformed from shelter into home, neither of them looked back. The past was behind them, all its pain and fear and impossible choices. Ahead lay only the future they'd chosen for themselves, together, as husband and wife in every way that truly mattered. Free at last. They rode through this gathering dusk, the horses' hooves creating a steady rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. The landscape transformed as the sun sank lower, shadows stretching long across the prairie, turning the golden grass dark and mysterious. Neither of them spoke much during those first miles. There was too much to process, too many emotions swirling through them both to capture in words. But as full darkness fell and they made camp beside a creek that sang over smooth stones, Evelyn finally broke the silence. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked as Rowan built a small fire. "Your father, when he said you're still his heir? That you can't escape your responsibilities?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, feeding twigs to the growing flames. "My father always means what he says. But what he doesn't understand is that I'm not trying to escape responsibility. I'm just choosing different responsibilities. Ones I actually care about." He looked up at her, firelight dancing in his storm-gray eyes. "You, us, building something with my own hands rather than inheriting something built by his. That's not running away. That's running toward." "But he's right that we'll struggle," Evelyn said softly. "We have almost nothing, Rowan. No land of our own, no real money. Just a borrowed cabin and whatever work we can find. Are you really prepared for that? You, who grew up with everything?" "I grew up with everything except what mattered." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "Evelyn, I've spent 6 years working as a ranch hand, living in bunkhouses, eating simple food, wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation. I know what poverty looks like, and I'm not afraid of it. What I'm afraid of is waking up one day and realizing I've become my father, rich, powerful, and utterly alone." She leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I'm afraid too. Not of poverty, but of not being enough. You gave up so much for me. Your inheritance, your family, your entire future. What if I can't make that sacrifice worth it?" "You already have." Rowan turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Every moment with you is worth more than all my father's acres. Every smile, every conversation, every simple morning waking up knowing you're beside me, that's wealth beyond measure. Don't you see? You didn't take anything from me. You gave me everything I was missing." Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. She kissed him then, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and hope she couldn't quite express in words. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Rowan smiled with such pure happiness that she felt her heart might burst. "We should make it official, he said. "Find a preacher, get the paperwork done. Make it legal in every sense." "Are you proposing to me, Rowan Cross? Again?" "Every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." They spent that night under the stars, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, talking about their future with the kind of earnest planning that felt both mundane and magical. They'd fix up the cabin properly, add a proper door with real hinges, glass windows if they could afford them, maybe even a small porch where they could sit in the evenings. They'd expand the garden, maybe get some chickens, perhaps a milk cow if they could save enough. Rowan could find work on nearby ranches. His skill with horses alone would make him valuable anywhere. Evelyn could take in sewing or teach children to read, use the education she'd been forced to abandon. It wasn't a grand vision of wealth and power, but it was theirs, built on their own terms, and that made it precious beyond measure. They reached the cabin 3 days later, riding in as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. The place looked exactly as they'd left it, weathered but solid, waiting patiently for their return. As Rowan helped Evelyn down from the horse, her ankle was fully healed now, but he'd developed the habit of lifting her down, and neither of them wanted to break it. She felt a profound sense of homecoming. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," Rowan said softly. "Home," Evelyn repeated, testing the word, finding it fit perfectly. "Yes, home." They threw themselves into work with renewed purpose. Rowan rode to the nearest settlement, a small trading post 15 miles south, and returned with supplies, proper lumber, glass panes for windows, seeds for the garden, and news that the trading post owner needed someone to break a string of wild horses he'd acquired. The pay would be modest but fair, and it would give them a financial foundation to build on. "I'll be gone 3, maybe 4 weeks, Rowan explained that evening as they ate dinner at their newly repaired table. "He wants 12 horses trained to saddle, and I can't rush that kind of work." Evelyn's heart clenched at the thought of being alone for so long, but she understood necessity. "I'll be fine here. I've got the garden to tend, and I've been thinking about riding to that settlement myself, seeing if any families need a teacher for their children." "You'd have to be careful. Garner might have given up legal pursuit, but that doesn't mean he's given up entirely." "I know. But we can't live in fear forever, Rowan. And besides, she smiled, touching the ring on her finger. I'm protected now. I'm a married woman. That changes everything in how people see me. He reached across the table to take her hand. It changes everything in how I see myself, too. I'm a husband now. That's a responsibility I don't take lightly. Neither do I. Being a wife. They were quiet for a moment, both contemplating the enormity of what they'd become to each other in such a short time. Then Rowan spoke again, his voice careful. Evelyn, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before, but the timing never seemed right. She felt a flutter of apprehension. What is it? When I was at the trading post, I asked about Silas Garner. Wanted to know if he was still in the area, still a threat. Rowan's expression was troubled. The owner told me that Garner left Wyoming Territory, took whatever money he had and headed east, saying the territory had nothing left for him. Relief flooded through Evelyn so powerfully she felt lightheaded. He's gone? Really gone? Seems so. Apparently the scandal of the hearing destroyed his reputation. People started asking questions about his previous wives, about the mysterious circumstances of their deaths. Nothing was ever proven, but once people start wondering, start talking, Rowan shrugged. He couldn't stay here and maintain any social standing, so he left. Then we're safe. Really, truly safe. From Garner, yes. But Rowan hesitated, then continued. The trading post owner also told me my father's been asking questions. Not threatening, not offering money for information, just asking about where we are, how we're living, whether we need anything. Evelyn's joy dimmed slightly. What does he want? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to find out. Rowan stood, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. My father doesn't do anything without a purpose. If he's suddenly interested in our welfare, it's because he wants something or he's planning something. I just can't figure out what. Maybe he's just worried about you. He is your father, after all. Edmund Cross doesn't worry, he calculates. Every move he makes is strategic, designed to achieve a specific goal. The bitterness in Rowan's voice was clear. I've seen him destroy business rivals, crush competitors, manipulate entire markets to get what he wants. Love and worry don't enter into his decision-making process. Evelyn rose and went to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. Then we'll be careful. We'll watch for his moves and protect what we've built. But Rowan, we can't spend our whole lives waiting for your father to attack. At some point, we have to just live. He turned to her, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid. We won, remember? We stood up in that courtroom, and we won our freedom. I refuse to give that victory away by living in constant fear of what might happen. You're right. He pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. You're absolutely right. We live our lives, we build our future, and we deal with threats as they come. Together. Together, she agreed. Rowan left at dawn the next morning to begin his work with the wild horses. Evelyn stood in the cabin doorway, watching him ride away until he disappeared over the horizon, feeling both proud and bereft. This was what marriage meant, she realized. Not just the joy of being together, but the strength to support each other's work, even when it meant temporary separation. She threw herself into her own projects with determined energy. The garden needed constant attention as summer advanced, and she spent long hours weeding, watering, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She rode to the settlement twice, introducing herself to families there, offering her services as a teacher. By the end of the first week, she had 4 students, children of homesteaders who desperately wanted their sons and daughters to have the education they'd been denied. The pay was minimal, mostly offered in trade goods rather than cash, but it gave her purpose and connected her to the small community growing in this wild territory. In the evenings, she worked on the cabin, improving it bit by bit. She sewed curtains from fabric traded for her teaching services. She built simple shelves from scrap lumber Rowan had left behind. She even attempted to make a rocking chair, though the results were more functional than beautiful. Each small improvement felt like putting down roots, claiming this space as truly theirs. But the nights were hard. The cabin felt too empty without Rowan's presence, too quiet without his voice. She found herself talking to him anyway, sharing her day's events with the empty room, imagining his responses. More than once, she pulled out that old cloth, the one she'd used to bind his wounds 6 years ago, the one he'd carried through all his wandering, and held it close, a tangible reminder of the miracle that had brought them together. 17 days into their separation, Evelyn was in the garden harvesting the first ripe tomatoes when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped. Had Rowan finished early? But when she looked up, the rider wasn't Rowan at all. It was Edmund Cross. He rode a magnificent bay stallion, his posture erect and commanding even in the saddle. As he drew closer, Evelyn could see the expensive tailoring of his clothes, the quality of his tack, the unmistakable air of wealth and power that surrounded him like armor. Everything about him screamed civilization and refinement, making their simple cabin look even more primitive by comparison. "Mrs. Cross," he said as he dismounted, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. "I hope I'm not intruding." Evelyn straightened, very aware of the dirt on her hands and the sweat on her brow, refusing to be intimidated. "Mr. Cross, I'm afraid Rowan isn't here. He's working at the trading post for the next few weeks." "Yes, I know. I timed my visit for when he'd be away." Edmund's gray eyes, so like his son's but so much colder, studied her with unsettling intensity. "I wanted to speak with you. Alone." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to send him away, to wait for Rowan before engaging in whatever game Edmund was playing. But something else, pride maybe, or the need to prove she could handle herself, made her lift her chin and gesture toward the cabin. "Would you like some coffee? It's not fancy, but it's hot." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed Edmund's face. "Thank you. That would be welcome." Inside the cabin, Evelyn was hyper-aware of how humble everything must look to a man of Edmund's wealth. The rough furniture, the simple curtains, the obvious signs of poverty and hard work. But she refused to apologize for any of it as she poured coffee into their two mismatched cups and sat across from him at the table Rowan had built. "You have questions about why I'm here," Edmund said after taking a sip of the coffee. "That's natural. I'll be direct. I want to understand what my son sees in you. What made him throw away everything I built, everything I planned for him to live like this?" He gestured around the cabin, not quite contemptuous, but clearly baffled. "With respect, Mr. Cross, I don't think I can explain what Rowan sees in me. That's between him and his own heart." Evelyn kept her voice steady despite the pounding of her pulse. "But I can tell you what I see in him. I see a man of integrity who treats people with kindness and respect. I see someone who measures worth by character rather than bank balance. I see the kind of man who saves a stranger from drowning, who protects someone he barely knows, who keeps his promises no matter the cost. That's what I love about your son. And if you can't see those qualities as valuable, then that's your loss, not his." Edmund was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, a small smile tugged at his lips. "Catherine would have liked you. My wife, Rowan's mother. She would have said exactly that kind of thing to me, with exactly that kind of fire." The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "She was the only person who ever stood up to me, who challenged my assumptions and made me question whether I was building an empire or a prison. Rowan told me about her, that she was kind, that she softened you. She did. For a while." Edmund stared into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he'd never asked. "When she died, I convinced myself that her softness, her kindness, those were weaknesses that had killed her. That if I could just eliminate sentiment, focus purely on practical matters, I could protect myself from ever feeling that kind of pain again." "And did it work?" "No." The admission seemed to cost him something. "All it did was drive away the one person I had left who might have reminded me what Catherine was like, my son, who has her eyes, her kindness, her damn stubborn insistence on doing what's right rather than what's profitable." Evelyn set down her coffee cup, a terrible understanding dawning. "You didn't come here to threaten me or to try to buy Rowan back. You came here because you're lonely, because you've spent 6 years pushing away the only family you have left, and you're starting to realize what that's cost you." Edmund's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "Don't presume to psychoanalyze me, young woman. You don't know anything about—" I know that Rowan kept a piece of cloth for 6 years because a stranger showed him kindness when he needed it most, Evelyn interrupted. I know he walked away from a fortune because he'd rather be poor and honest than rich and compromised. I know he loves you enough that it breaks his heart every time he talks about the distance between you. So yes, Mr. Cross, I think I know quite a bit about what's really going on here. The silence that followed was heavy and charged. Edmund stared at her with an expression caught between anger and something else, something vulnerable that he clearly didn't know how to handle. He talks about me? Edmund finally asked, his voice rough. All the time. About the father you were before his mother died. About lessons you taught him, skills you passed down. About how he wishes things could be different between you. Evelyn leaned forward, pressing her advantage. But they can't be different until you're willing to see him as he really is, not as you wanted him to be. Until you can accept that his choices, including his choice to marry me, are about building a life he can be proud of, not about rejecting you. Even if those choices lead to poverty, to struggle. We're not afraid of struggle. We're afraid of becoming people we don't recognize, people who measure everything by its price tag rather than its worth. She held Edmund's gaze steadily. Rowan could have had everything you offered him, money, power, land, status, but he chose me instead. He chose love over wealth. And if you can't understand why that's the braver choice, the nobler choice, then you really have lost everything that mattered about the man you used to be, the man Catherine fell in love with. Edmund stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. For a moment, Evelyn thought she'd gone too far, that he'd leave in anger and ensure that Rowan never had a chance to reconcile with his father. But instead, Edmund moved to the window, staring out at the land beyond with his hands clasped behind his back. I started with nothing, he said quietly. 100 head of cattle in a dream. I worked 20-hour days, slept on the ground, went hungry so my herd could eat. And I told myself that once I'd built something substantial, once I had wealth and security, I'd never be vulnerable like that again. Never at the mercy of weather or market prices or other people's whims. He turned back to face her. Catherine understood that drive, but she also understood it was consuming me. She tried to pull me back, remind me there was more to life than accumulation. And I resented her for it, saw her gentleness as weakness, her kindness as naivety. I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot why I was building it in the first place. It's not too late, Evelyn said softly. To remember, to change. Isn't it? I've spent 6 years estranged from my only son, 6 years being the kind of man he had to escape from to become himself. How do I come back from that? The same way you started with nothing and built everything, one step at a time, one honest conversation, one admission that you were wrong, one apology. She stood and moved to stand beside him at the window. Rowan wants to reconcile with you, Mr. Cross. He's just waiting for some sign that you see him as more than a disappointment, that you can love the man he is rather than mourning the man you wanted him to be. Edmund was silent for a long time, his face a complicated landscape of emotions he clearly wasn't used to expressing. Then, you're stronger than you look, tougher than I expected, maybe tough enough to build a life out here with nothing but determination and stubbornness. We have more than that. We have each other. And we have skills. Rowan's way with horses, my teaching, our willingness to work hard for what we want. Evelyn paused, then added carefully, but I won't lie and say it's easy. There are nights when I'm exhausted and scared and wondering if we made the right choice. If love is really enough when you're staring at an empty cupboard and a leaking roof and a future that feels impossibly hard. And on those nights, what keeps you going? Rowan. The way he looks at me like I'm worth more than all the gold in California. The way he listens when I talk, really listens, like my words matter. The way he works himself to exhaustion and still finds energy to make me laugh. She smiled, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Your son is the best man I've ever known, Mr. Cross. And if poverty is the price of being loved by him, then I'll pay it gladly for the rest of my life. Edmund turned away from the window, and when he met her eyes again, something in his expression had shifted. I came here today prepared to offer you money, a substantial sum to walk away, to let Rowan return to his responsibilities without the distraction of... He gestured vaguely at her. Evelyn felt cold wash through her. Distraction. Is that what you think I am? I thought so. But now, he shook his head slowly. Now I see that you're exactly what Catherine was to me. The person who refuses to let him settle for less than he could be. The person who challenges him to be better, not richer. The person who sees his worth independent of his last name or his inheritance. I'm nothing like You're exactly like her, Edmund interrupted, and there was an ache in his voice that made Evelyn's heart hurt for him. And God help me, I can't destroy that. I couldn't destroy it when Catherine was alive, and I can't destroy it now that Rowan's found it again. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. This isn't money to leave him, it's a deed. To this land, 200 acres surrounding this cabin. I bought it from the Territorial Land Office this morning. It's yours now, legally, no strings attached. Evelyn stared at the envelope like it might contain a snake. Why would you do that? Because my son chose to live here, with you. And while I may not understand that choice, while I may think it's foolish and short-sighted and wasteful of his potential, Edmund set the envelope on the table. It's his choice to make. And if he's going to live in poverty, the least I can do is make sure he owns the ground he's standing on, so that no one can take this away from you, so that you have something solid to build on. Mr. Cross, I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm not asking for anything except that you take care of my son, that you keep challenging him, supporting him, loving him the way Catherine loved me. Edmund moved toward the door, then paused. And perhaps someday when he's ready, you might tell him that his father came by, that we talked, that I'm starting to understand what he saw clearly all along. You could tell him yourself, Evelyn suggested, when he gets back. Stay, have dinner with us, actually talk to him instead of talking about him. Edmund's hand was on the door handle, his back to her. For a long moment he didn't move, then, no, not yet. I have to figure out how to be the kind of father who deserves a son like Rowan before I can face him. But someday, if he'll have me. He left then, mounting his magnificent horse and riding away without looking back. Evelyn stood in the doorway watching him go, the envelope heavy in her hands, her mind reeling from everything that had just happened. She opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was indeed a land deed, officially registered, transferring ownership of 200 acres to Rowan and Evelyn Cross jointly. No conditions, no repayment terms, no strings of any kind. Just land. Solid, permanent, theirs. When Rowan returned 3 weeks later, sunburned and exhausted but proud of the work he'd done, Evelyn met him in the doorway with tears streaming down her face and a smile that wouldn't quit. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, concern flooding his features as he dismounted. "Did something happen? Are you hurt?" "No, nothing's wrong. Everything's right." "So right." She threw herself into his arms, nearly knocking him over with the force of her embrace. "I missed you so much, and I have so much to tell you about students and gardens and your father and—" "Wait, my father?" Rowan pulled back to look at her face. "What about my father?" So she told him everything. About Edmund's visit, their conversation, the vulnerability he'd shown, the gift he'd left. She watched Rowan's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like hope, tempered by years of disappointment. "He gave us land?" Rowan repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. "Actually gave us land with no strings attached?" "See for yourself." Evelyn handed him the deed. Rowan studied the document, his hands trembling slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. 200 acres. God, Evelyn, do you know what this means? We're not squatters anymore. We're landowners. We can build here, really build, without fear of being displaced or discovered or run off by someone with a better claim. Your father said to tell you that he's starting to understand, that he needs time to figure out how to be the kind of father you deserve, but that someday, if you'll let him, he'd like to try. Did he really say that? Those actual words? Close enough. He mentioned your mother a lot, how I remind him of her, how she tried to keep him from losing himself in empire building. Evelyn took Rowan's hand. I think he's been grieving her all these years, and pushing you away was his way of avoiding the pain of potentially losing someone else he loved. But that wall he built to protect himself has been a prison instead, and he's finally starting to see it. Rowan pulled her close again, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with emotion. I never thought I'd given up hoping he could change, that we could ever have any kind of relationship again. Maybe you can. Not right away, but eventually, if you're willing to give him a chance when he's ready. Of course I'm willing. He's my father. I never stopped loving him, even when I couldn't stand being around him. Rowan pulled back, cupping her face in his calloused hands. Thank you. For talking to him, for not sending him away, for saying the things I've never been able to say. You're remarkable, Evelyn Cross. Absolutely remarkable. I'm really just stubborn and too blunt for my own good. That too, but also remarkable. He kissed her then, deep and long and thorough, pouring into it all the emotion of their separation and reunion, all the joy of their unexpected gift, all the love that had grown between them like a living thing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Rowan took her hand and led her outside, surveying their land with new eyes. The cabin looked small and rough against the vastness of the territory, but it was theirs. The garden they'd planted together was thriving, promising food for the coming winter. The well ran clean and cold, and beyond, stretching in all directions, were acres upon acres of possibility. We're going to need a bigger garden, Rowan said thoughtfully, and maybe some cattle eventually, a few horses of our own. Perhaps even, he looked at Evelyn with an expression of wonder, perhaps even room for children someday, if we're blessed with them. Children. Evelyn hadn't let herself think that far ahead, too focused on simply surviving day to day. But now, with land beneath their feet and a future spreading out before them, she could imagine it. Could see little ones running through that garden, learning to ride horses, growing up with the kind of security and love she'd been denied. Someday, she agreed softly, when we're ready, when we've built something stable enough to bring new lives into. We'll build it together, everything, one day at a time. Rowan's arm circled her waist, pulling her close against his side. My father gave us land, but we'll make it a home. That's the difference between what he offers and what we create. He gives things. We make meaning. As the sun set over their 200 acres, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Evelyn felt a peace settle over her that she'd never known before. Not just the absence of danger, but the presence of genuine contentment. She'd run from one kind of imprisonment only to find something better than freedom. She'd found belonging. The journey had been terrifying and painful and marked by narrow escapes and desperate chances. But standing here now with Rowan's arm around her and land they owned beneath their feet and a future they could shape with their own hands, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that every hardship had been worth it. She thought of that night in the storm when she'd asked a stranger to pretend to be her husband. Thought of how that desperate lie had become the truest thing in her life. Thought of how sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. How grace can emerge from chaos. How love can bloom in the most unlikely soil. What are you thinking? Rowan asked, sensing her reflective mood. I'm thinking that I asked you to pretend to be my husband, and somehow you became the realest thing in my life. I'm thinking about how we saved each other, first in a river, then in a storm, and now every single day just by choosing to stay together. She turned to face him fully, her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palms. I'm thinking that I love you, Rowan Cross, more than I knew it was possible to love another human being, and I'm so grateful for every twist of fate that brought us to this moment. Even the bad parts? He asked gently. Even running from Garner, even the fear and the chase and the danger. Even those. Because without them, I never would have fled into that storm. Never would have met you. Never would have discovered that love isn't just a pretty word. It's a choice you make every day to stand beside someone and build something better together. Rowan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft butterfly kisses that felt like benedictions. Then I'm grateful too, for the storm that brought you to me, for your courage in running, for the miracle of finding each other twice, for all of it. They stood there as darkness fell completely, watching the first stars appear in the endless Wyoming sky. Somewhere far away, Edmund Cross was beginning his own journey toward redemption. Somewhere else, Silas Garner was fleeing the consequences of his cruelty. And here, on 200 acres of possibility, Two people who'd found each other against all odds were finally truly home. The cabin needed work, the land needed cultivation, the future needed building. But they had time, they had each other, and most importantly, they had the will to create something beautiful from the raw materials of determination and love. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The seasons turned, and with them came the slow, steady transformation of their land from wilderness into home. Autumn arrived first, painting the cottonwoods gold and filling the air with the scent of approaching winter. Rowan and Evelyn worked from dawn to dusk, racing against the cold, determined to make the cabin weatherproof before the first snows fell. They expanded the structure, adding a proper bedroom and a small storage room for provisions. Rowan built furniture with his own hands, a real bed frame, sturdy chairs, shelves for the growing collection of books Evelyn was accumulating from families whose children she taught. Each piece was simple but solid, made with care and built to last. Evelyn sewed quilts from scraps of fabric traded for her teaching services, their patterns telling the story of their first year together in patches and stitches. The garden yielded more than they'd hoped: tomatoes and squash, beans and potatoes, enough to fill their small root cellar and trade with neighbors for other necessities. They acquired 3 chickens from a grateful family whose daughter had learned to read under Evelyn's patient instruction, and the birds provided eggs that felt like luxury after months of making do with so little. But it was hard work, harder than either of them had fully anticipated. There were days when Rowan came home so exhausted from breaking horses or mending fences for neighboring ranchers that he could barely eat before collapsing into bed. There were nights when Evelyn lay awake worrying about whether they'd have enough food to last the winter, whether the cabin would hold against the fierce Wyoming storms, whether they'd made a terrible mistake in thinking love alone could sustain them. On one such night, as the first real blizzard of the season howled outside their walls, Evelyn finally voiced her fears. "What if we can't make it?" she whispered into the darkness. "What if all this work, all this struggle, isn't enough?" Rowan pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her waist. "Then we'll figure something else out. We'll adapt. We'll change our approach. We'll do whatever we have to do. But we won't quit, Evelyn. We didn't survive everything we survived just to give up because things got difficult." "Your father's offer is still out there," she said carefully. "You could go back, reconcile with him, take your place in the family business. We'd have security, comfort, a future without constant worry about where the next meal is coming from. Is that what you want?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, listening to the wind scream and the cabin creak around them. "No," she finally admitted. "I want this. I want the struggle and the uncertainty and the knowledge that everything we have, we earned ourselves. I want to wake up beside you knowing we built this life with our own hands. Sometimes I get scared that wanting it isn't enough to make it work. Wanting it is only the beginning. The work is what makes it real." Rowan's voice was steady in the darkness. "And we're doing the work, both of us. Look at this cabin. 6 months ago, it was barely shelter. Now it's a home. Look at that garden. We grew food from nothing but dirt and seeds and determination. Look at us. We were strangers running from danger, and now we're partners building something that will outlast us both." "You really believe that? That what we're building will last?" "I believe that love like ours doesn't come along often. And when it does, it's worth fighting for, worth struggling for, worth every cold night and hungry day and moment of doubt." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, we're not alone in this anymore. Tom checks on us. Your students' families look out for us. Even my father, in his way, is watching from a distance, making sure we have what we need. We're part of a community now, Evelyn. That's worth more than all the wealth in my father's accounts." The blizzard lasted 3 days, burying their cabin in snow up to the windows. But inside, they stayed warm and safe, rationing their supplies carefully, telling each other stories to pass the time. Rowan talked about his childhood before his mother died, when his father had been different, stern but loving, demanding but fair. Evelyn shared memories of her sister, keeping Sarah alive through words and laughter even though she'd been gone for so many years. When the storm finally broke and they dug their way out into a world transformed by white, they found a package on their doorstep: food supplies, warm blankets, and a note in Tom's familiar scrawl. "Figured you might need these. Pay it forward when you can." Evelyn cried when she read it, overwhelmed by the kindness of a man who barely knew them but had appointed himself their guardian anyway. Rowan held her as she wept, understanding that these were good tears, grateful tears, the kind that came from recognizing you weren't as alone as you feared. Winter deepened, but they endured. They learned to read the weather, to prepare for storms before they hit, to make their supplies stretch further than seemed possible. Rowan took on more work, hiring himself out to ranchers who needed experienced hands for the hardest jobs. Evelyn expanded her teaching, taking on adult students who'd never learned to read and were determined to master it before they died. The money was never much, but it was steady, and slowly their resources grew. Spring came like a revelation, the snow melting to reveal mud and dead grass that would soon transform into green. With the thaw came visitors, neighbors they'd helped through the winter, families whose children Evelyn had taught, fellow homesteaders who'd heard about the young couple making something from nothing and wanted to see for themselves. And one warm April morning, as Evelyn was planting the season's first seeds, a familiar rider appeared on the horizon. Edmund Cross had returned. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him rode a woman, middle-aged, handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. And behind them came a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, glass windows, and supplies enough to transform their simple cabin into something approaching a real house. Rowan had been mending fence when he saw them coming. He dropped his tools and started walking toward the approaching party, his pace quickening until he was nearly running. Evelyn watched from the garden, her heart in her throat, as father and son met in the middle of the clearing. For a long moment, they just stood there, facing each other across years of hurt and misunderstanding. Then Edmund extended his hand and Rowan took it. The handshake transformed into an embrace, both men's shoulders shaking with emotion too long suppressed. "I'm sorry," Evelyn heard Edmund say, his voice carrying across the distance. "For everything. For not seeing you, for trying to make you into something you weren't, for being so blinded by my own ambitions that I drove away the only family I had left. I'm so sorry, son." "I'm sorry too," Rowan replied, his voice thick. "For leaving the way I did. For not trying harder to make you understand. For letting pride keep us apart for so long." They talked for a long time, sitting on the fence rail while the spring sun climbed higher, years of accumulated hurt and resentment slowly dissolving in honest conversation. Evelyn gave them privacy, turning her attention to the woman who'd accompanied Edmund. "Mrs. Cross, I'm Margaret Hartley," the woman introduced herself with a warm handshake. "I'm Edmund's, well, I suppose you'd call me his companion. We've been courting for the past few months." Evelyn's surprise must have shown on her face because Margaret laughed kindly. "I know, it shocked everyone who knew him. Edmund Cross, the man who swore he'd never love again after Catherine died, suddenly keeping company with a widow from Cheyenne. But grief can't last forever, and loneliness is a terrible thing. Your husband helped him see that, even if neither of them realized it at the time." "How did I help?" Evelyn asked, confused. "By loving Rowan the way Catherine loved Edmund, completely, without reservation, without trying to change him into something he wasn't. Edmund saw that, and it reminded him what he'd lost, what he'd been missing. It made him realize that pushing away love didn't protect him from pain. It just guaranteed he'd be in pain forever." Margaret's smile was gentle. "I'm a widow myself, lost my husband 5 years ago. I understand what it means to lose someone you love. But I also understand that life continues, and love can bloom again if you let it. Edmund and I were helping each other remember that." Over the next few days, a small miracle occurred. Edmund and his hired men worked alongside Rowan to expand the cabin, adding proper walls, real windows, a stone foundation that would last generations. Margaret and Evelyn worked together in the garden, planning improvements and expansions, talking about everything and nothing the way women do when they're building friendship. In the evenings, they all gathered around the fire, sharing meals and stories. Edmund talked about the changes he was making to his ranch, treating his workers better, paying fair wages, thinking about sustainability rather than just immediate profit. He spoke carefully at first, as if expecting criticism, but found only encouragement from his son. "You're becoming the man Mother always believed you could be," Rowan said one night, his voice quiet but firm. "She'd be proud of you, Father. I'm proud of you." Edmund's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I wish she could see this. See you with Evelyn. See me trying to be better. See us finally understanding each other. I think she does see it, Evelyn said softly. I think she's been watching all along, waiting patiently for both of you to find your way back to each other. On the morning of the 5th day, Edmund asked to speak with Rowan and Evelyn privately. They walked together to a rise overlooking their land, the morning sun painting everything gold. I have a proposition, Edmund began, his tone careful. Not a demand or a requirement, just an offer you're free to refuse. I want to deed you an additional 500 acres adjacent to your current land. Not as a gift this time, but as an investment in what you're building here. Rowan's expression was wary. What kind of investment? What would you want in return? Nothing. You're not already doing. You've been taking in horses to train, working for other ranchers, building a reputation for fair dealing and skilled work. I want to formalize that. Set you up as an official horse training operation, with proper facilities and resources to do the work right. You'd be your own boss, make your own decisions, but you'd have the capital to really build something substantial. Father, I don't want your money. That's not why I know that, Edmund interrupted. This isn't about money or control or trying to pull you back into my world. This is about recognizing that you have skills worth investing in and that I have resources I can offer without strings attached. Think of it as a business arrangement between equals. I provide capital, you provide expertise, and we split any profits fairly. Evelyn watched Rowan's face as he processed this offer, seeing the conflict there. The pride that wanted to refuse, to prove they could do everything themselves, but also the pragmatism that recognized opportunity when it was offered honestly. Could we think about it? Rowan finally asked. Discuss it between us before making a decision? Of course. Take all the time you need. Edmund glanced at Margaret, who was waiting patiently by the wagon. We'll be in Cheyenne for the next month if you want to reach me. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I'm just glad we're talking again. Glad I got to meet your wife properly, see the life you're building. That's worth more than any business arrangement. After Edmund and Margaret left, Rowan and Evelyn spent hours discussing the offer, weighing the benefits against the risks, trying to see all the angles. It could change everything, Evelyn said as they walked their land in the evening light. Proper facilities would mean you could train more horses, take on bigger contracts. We could hire help, expand the operation, maybe even start breeding our own stock. But it would also tie us to my father again, create obligations, expectations. What if he starts trying to control how we run things? What if this is just his way of slowly pulling me back into his world? I don't think it is. Not after spending time with him this week. Evelyn stopped walking, turning to face Rowan directly. Your father is changing, Rowan. Really changing. Margaret's influence, your example, the years of loneliness, all of it has opened his eyes to what really matters. I think he genuinely wants to help us, not control us. You trust him? I trust that he loves you. And I trust that you're smart enough to structure any agreement in a way that protects our independence while accepting help that could make our lives significantly better. She took both his hands. We've proven we can survive on our own. We've built something real from nothing. But that doesn't mean we have to refuse all help forever. Sometimes accepting support from people who love us isn't weakness, it's wisdom. They decided to accept Edmund's offer, but with careful conditions. Rowan would maintain full control over the training operation's day-to-day decisions. Any profits would be split 60-40 in their favor until Edmund's initial investment was repaid, then 50-50 thereafter. And most importantly, either party could dissolve the partnership at any time without penalty or hard feelings. Edmund agreed to every condition without hesitation, and by early summer, construction began on proper training facilities. A large corral, a covered arena for working horses in bad weather, a barn with multiple stalls, and a small bunkhouse for the hired hands they'd eventually need. As the structures rose, so did Rowan's reputation. Word spread about the young horse trainer who could gentle the wildest Mustang, who had infinite patience and a gift for understanding what horses needed. Ranchers came from 100 miles away to have their animals trained by Rowan Cross, and each satisfied customer brought more work. Evelyn continued her teaching, but now she had a real schoolhouse, a small building Edmund had constructed as a gift to the community, honoring Evelyn's work with the children and adults who so desperately needed education. She named it Catherine Hall, after the mother-in-law she'd never met, but whose legacy of kindness and vision lived on through the family she'd left behind. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch Rowan had built watching the sunset paint the sky, Evelyn felt a familiar flutter in her abdomen. She'd been feeling it for weeks now, but tonight it was stronger, more insistent. She took Rowan's hand and placed it on her slightly rounded stomach, waiting. "Did you feel that?" she whispered when the flutter came again. Rowan's eyes went wide, his hand spreading across her belly as if he could protect the life growing there through sheer will. "The baby?" "Our baby." Evelyn smiled through sudden tears. "Due in February, the doctor in town thinks. We're going to be parents, Rowan." He pulled her close, cradling her against his chest, his own eyes wet. "A baby. Our child. God, Evelyn, I never let myself hope for this much happiness." "Neither did I. But here we are." She nestled closer, feeling safe and loved and deeply, profoundly grateful. Building a family, building a life, building something that will last long after we're gone. They told Edmund and Margaret the news the next time they visited, and the joy on Edmund's face was something Evelyn would treasure forever. "A grandchild," he breathed, looking suddenly younger, more vital. "Catherine would be so happy, so proud of both of you." As autumn returned and Evelyn's pregnancy advanced, the community rallied around them. Neighbors brought baby clothes their own children had outgrown. Margaret arrived with blankets she'd knitted herself and wisdom gleaned from raising her own 3 children. Even Tom made the long ride from the relay station, bringing gifts and gruff affection. The baby came on a frigid February morning, arriving with the dawn after a long, difficult night. Rowan held Evelyn's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave her side even when Margaret suggested he might want to wait outside like most men did. "I'm not most men," he said firmly, "and Evelyn's not facing this alone." When their daughter finally emerged, red-faced and screaming her indignation at the cold world, Rowan wept openly. "She's perfect," he whispered, watching as Margaret cleaned the baby and placed her in Evelyn's arms. "Absolutely perfect." They named her Catherine, after Rowan's mother, but called her Kate from the beginning. She had Rowan's gray eyes and Evelyn's determination, making her preferences known from day one, with a will that made them both laugh and marvel. Edmund met his granddaughter when she was a week old, and the sight of the tough old rancher cradling the tiny baby with infinite gentleness made Evelyn cry all over again. "She has Catherine's eyes," Edmund whispered, touching Kate's tiny fingers. "The same color, the same expression. It's like having a piece of her back." The years flowed like water after that, each season bringing new changes and challenges. They had 2 more children, a son named Thomas, after Tom, who'd done so much to help them, and another daughter they called Sarah, honoring Evelyn's lost sister. The cabin expanded again and again, transforming into a proper house with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, even a parlor where Evelyn could teach her evening classes. The horse training operation grew until Rowan employed 6 full-time hands and had a waiting list of clients stretching months into the future. But he never lost touch with the hands-on work he loved, still spending hours in the corral working with difficult horses, teaching them trust and partnership rather than fear and submission. Evelyn's school flourished, eventually drawing students from as far as 50 miles away. Some came just for basic reading and writing, but others stayed for advanced study, hungry for knowledge and opportunity. She taught history and literature, mathematics and science, preparing young people for lives they might never have imagined possible. When the territorial government formally recognized Catherine Hall as an official school offering funding and resources, Evelyn cried with pride and gratitude. Edmund became a fixture in their lives, visiting regularly. His relationship with Rowan transformed from bitter estrangement to genuine friendship. He and Margaret married in a quiet ceremony, and watching them together, older, wiser, scarred by loss but open to love, reminded everyone that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become better. Tom lived to see his 80th birthday, surrounded by the community he'd helped nurture. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, the funeral drew hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched. Evelyn and Rowan spoke at the service, telling stories of his kindness, his gruff wisdom, his unfailing belief in helping people who needed help. They buried him on a hill overlooking the land he'd loved, with a marker that read simply, Tom Eldridge. He opened doors. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Kate inherited her father's gift with horses, and her mother's love of learning, somehow managing to excel at both. Thomas became fascinated with building and engineering, constantly sketching designs for improvements to the ranch and dreaming of the structures he'd create someday. Little Sarah was the artist, painting and drawing everything she saw, capturing the beauty of their frontier life in images that took Evelyn's breath away. On their 10th anniversary, Rowan took Evelyn back to the site where they'd first met, where he'd pulled her from the storm and she'd asked him to pretend to be her husband. The relay station was still there, though Tom's nephew ran it now. The landscape was unchanged, vast and wild and beautiful. "Do you remember what I told the marshal that night?" Rowan asked as they stood in the spot where their journey had truly begun. "When he asked if you were my wife. You said I was, that we'd been married in Montana. I said it was true then, even though it was a lie. But you know what? In every way that mattered, it was true. From the moment I saw you in that storm, you were mine and I was yours. The rest was just paperwork and ceremony catching up to what our hearts already knew." Evelyn leaned against him, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor through every storm since that first night. "I asked you to pretend, but there was never any pretending, was there? It was all real from the very beginning." "All real," he confirmed, kissing her temple. "And it always will be." They rode back to their ranch as the sun set, the same sun that had witnessed their first desperate flight now shining on their homecoming. The house, their house, built by their hands and filled with their family, glowed with lamplight. Children's voices drifted through open windows, horses whinnied in the corrals, smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and food and home. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd risked everything to build. Not wealth or status or power, but this: family, community, purpose, love. Years later, when their children were grown and had families of their own, when grandchildren ran through the fields where Evelyn had once planted her first uncertain seeds, people would still tell the story of how Rowan and Evelyn Cross had come together. How a desperate woman running from forced marriage had asked a stranger to pretend to be her husband, and how that stranger had turned out to be the one person in all the world she was meant to find. Some called it fate. Others called it miracle. But Rowan and Evelyn knew the truth. It was choice. The choice to help someone in need. The choice to trust a stranger. The choice to fight for freedom. The choice to build something better. The choice to love fully and completely, even when everything else was uncertain. And most importantly, the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through storms and sunshine, poverty and prosperity, struggle and triumph. On Evelyn's 60th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house that had grown from a one-room cabin, she found Rowan on their porch watching the sunset. His hair was silver now, his face lined with years, but his eyes were still that same storm gray, still looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Giving up your father's empire for this life?" Rowan took her hand, the hand that still bore the scar he'd recognized all those years ago, the hand that wore his mother's silver ring, and brought it to his lips. "Not for a single moment, not for a single heartbeat. You gave me everything that matters, Evelyn, a home, a family, a purpose, a love that sustained me through everything life could throw at us. How could I regret any of that? We've had a good life, haven't we? We've had a magnificent life, and we're not done yet." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged one by one in the endless Wyoming sky. Inside the house, their family laughed and talked and told stories, keeping alive the history of how their family began with a question asked in desperation and answered with courage. "Can you pretend to be my husband tonight?" That single question, asked by a frightened woman to a stranger in a storm, had changed everything, had set in motion a chain of events that led to this moment, to this family, to this legacy of love and determination that would outlive them both. Evelyn thought about that night often, how close she'd come to not asking, to facing her enemies alone, to missing the great love of her life because pride or fear kept her silent. What if she'd been too frightened to speak? What if Rowan had refused? What if he'd been anyone other than exactly who he was? The man who'd once drowned and been saved by a stranger, who'd spent years searching for his rescuer, who recognized a scar across a palm and saw it as destiny rather than coincidence. But she had asked, and he had answered, and everything that mattered had flowed from that moment of desperate courage and unexpected grace. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars shone bright above their home, Evelyn squeezed Rowan's hand. He squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was a lifetime of shared memories, of struggles overcome together, of joy multiplied by sharing, of love that had only grown stronger with passing years. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For saying yes, for pretending that night, for making it real every day since." Rowan smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart a decade ago, unchanged by time or trouble. "Thank you for asking, for being brave enough to trust a stranger, for giving me a reason to become the man I wanted to be." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of desperation. Their story would live on through their children and grandchildren, told and retold, a testament to the truth that love isn't always gentle or easy or predictable. Sometimes love arrives in a storm, disguised as a stranger. Sometimes it asks you to risk everything on a leap of faith. Sometimes it demands that you choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, connection over isolation. But when you make those choices, when you have the bravery to ask for help and the grace to offer it, when you recognize the sacred in the stranger and the extraordinary in the ordinary, that's when miracles happen. That's when a desperate lie becomes the truest thing you'll ever say. That's when "Can you pretend to be my husband?" transforms into "Will you be mine forever?" And the answer, spoken in 1,000 ways over a lifetime of choices, is always the same. Yes. Forever, yes. In the house behind them, someone started playing the piano, their youngest granddaughter, practicing the piece she'd learned for the upcoming recital. The music drifted through the open windows, sweet and slightly imperfect, like life itself. Rowan stood, offering Evelyn his hand. "Dance with me? Out here? With no music except what's floating through the windows? We've built our whole life on improvisation and faith. Why stop now?" So they danced on the porch under the stars, moving slowly to distant music, their bodies knowing the rhythm of partnership after decades of practice. And as they swayed together in the darkness, Evelyn realized that this was the truest moment of their entire story, not the dramatic rescue or the courtroom triumph or any single spectacular event, but this quiet dance in the dark, this choice to hold each other close when the world couldn't see, when there was no one to impress and nothing to prove except that they still loved each other as much as they ever had. Maybe more. Because love that survives storms and struggles, that endures through raising children and building businesses and navigating the 1,000 small compromises of shared life, that love runs deeper than any first passion, any desperate attraction, any romantic gesture. That love is earned, built, chosen every day, in every moment, through every challenge. That love lasts. The music from inside stopped, then started again, someone else taking a turn at the piano, playing a different tune. But Rowan and Evelyn kept dancing, not needing any particular song, just moving together in the rhythm they'd created over years of practice. "I love you," Evelyn whispered against his chest. "I love you too," Rowan replied. "From the moment you asked that question in the storm, forever, from that moment." And they danced on into the night, under the vast Wyoming sky, on the land they'd made home through determination and hope and love that refused to be diminished by hardship or doubt or fear. Two souls who'd saved each other, two hearts that beat as one, two lives that had become one story, a story of courage and grace, of desperate questions answered by unexpected heroes, of love that transformed lies into truth, and strangers into soulmates. A story that began with pretending and became the realest thing either of them would ever know. A story that would never truly end, because love like theirs doesn't die with the lovers. It lives on in the children they raised, the community they built, the countless lives they touched, and the enduring truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the scariest moments. if we're just brave enough to ask for help and wise enough to offer it when asked. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to one more night of love on the frontier. And somewhere in the darkness, the wind whispered through the grass with a sound like applause, celebrating the ordinary miracle of two people who'd found each other, chosen each other, and built a lifetime of happiness from a single desperate question and its courageous answer, the end of the story. But never the end of the love. That would last forever.